it takes a lot of guts to go out there, especially when somebody's trying to choke you unconscious or break your limbs. It's not an easy thing to do. And it takes a lot of effort. You're going to get exhausted. You're going to have trouble breathing and it creates a lot of anxiety. But one of the things I did that really, really helped was to stop focusing on the outcome. Like, don't think about winning and losing. Think about putting in my best effort. Because when I was so focused on winning, it was too much of, I need to do this, don't do this, that kind of thing, where it was like, no, just go out there, try as hard as you can. Like, if you need to be aggressive, I'll take a shot within the first 30 seconds, set it up, don't force it. But I need to do this, is like, just be focused on, putting in a good effort, give 100%, and then be proud of yourself and be satisfied with the effort and don't worry about the outcome. And what happens is you put in the effort, the outcome will take care of itself. And so that removed a lot of pressure.
Sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Janae Kroc. I was looking the other day at how long I've known you, and we're getting close to 20 years. Yeah. Which is kind of insane when you think about it. I want to jump off and just throw some whack shit out, right? So I have a whole list of these stories to go through, because some of these can't be lost. They can't be forgotten. They have to be archived in some way. So I'm going to start with the Muscle Tech photo shoot. Oh, yeah. Right? You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So
that was back in what, S3?
Yes. Yeah. So the gym we had at the time was like a John Deere dealership in the middle of nowhere. And you have a photo shoot with Muscle Tech and my side of this whole thing, right? I don't know at the time if it was powerlifting or bodybuilding was the focus. I think it was still powerlifting. Yeah. And so I'm thinking photo shoot, right? And it was the front load opening monolift. Yep. And you decided that for this to be authentic, you had to squat 8 something.
Actually, I think we went up to 970.
Yeah, it was way up there. I was thinking 880, but it was up there. And there's one photographer, right? Yep. And there was a cart, that the photographer had with like a laptop and a tripod and all this other stuff. And long story short, we're trying to figure out how heavy to go, and you're just like, fuck it, load it all up. And then you miss whatever it was, 970. And it was catastrophic. It could have been way worse. Yeah. Let's put it that way. But because it was a front opening monolift, there's nothing to catch the bar. Yeah. So boom, bar goes, you hit the ground, bar goes forward, almost takes out the guy's cart. And as soon as you get up at the same time, we look at the dude and we're like, did you get that? Yeah. Right?
Oh, shit. Yeah, I kind of forgot all about that. Yeah, I think what it was is we couldn't get it back in the racks, like the way it settled. Mm-hmm. And I went to re-rack it and it wouldn't go in. And it was just you and me. Yeah. No spotters. So like, fuck it. I'm going to dump it. And then you and I are both like, oh, did you get that? That was probably cool. And then, dude, I remember his eyes being like this big and he was just like freaked out of his mind. And, but yeah, both of us were like, normal shit. Like,
no, it wasn't normal, but it was still, I wanted to see it. It's like, did you film it? They weren't filming stuff, but at least I want to see that picture of, down in there. And it was, I don't know what happened after that, because everything after that, my mind is just blur. So I'm sure something came out of the whole thing. And the images were good. Yeah. I mean, the ads were good when it came out. Every time I would see that ad, I'm like, people have no idea, what happened with all this.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause everyone was trying to figure it out, like, no spotter, but they're trying to get a good photo and you were just running the hooks and And, but yeah, like we didn't, we're just, hey, let's get this done. And that was one big thing. Like when they brought me on board, it was like the photo shoots, and I knew like they had like fake dumbbells and some fake plates. And I was like, look, I don't want to do any of that stuff. And part of the thing they made clear too was part of the reason they brought me on, because they wanted stuff to be more authentic and more real. And then it was like, obviously if you're doing a photo shoot, and sometimes we do 8-9 hour photo shoots, you're not going to be able to train heavy for 9 hours straight. So sometimes, or they'd Photoshop stuff at the end. And I was like, look, if you want to Photoshop stuff, I get that, but don't ever make it more than I can actually do. Yeah. If it's something within my capabilities that I've actually done or can do, that's fine. But don't show me inclining 8 plates aside or some bullshit like that, And they always laughed at me because there was a time we were filming at Muscle Tech in their gym, and I knew they had some fake 45s. I think they were made out of aluminum. And this is back like in the middle of like the prime of my career. And I loaded up a bunch of plates on squats, and I don't know what it was, like not a ton. Like I was still on my way working up, and it was like 6 or 7 plates aside. And I did a set or whatever, and they took some film, and I was like, well, how much does that weigh? And they're like, well, don't you know how many plates are? I'm like, yeah, but I'm like, but yeah, half of these are fake. And they all started laughing, and I'm like, what? And they're like, those aren't fake. Those are all real plates.
Oh, wow.
And they were all laughing that I didn't, it was one of those days I probably felt strong. Everything felt super light. And I just assumed they had thrown fake plates on there, but there weren't any fake plates.
Well, that can mess with your mind there a little bit too, because you leave later thinking, and I'm way stronger than what I should be.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that we had back when bench shirts were a nightmare, right? The denim shirts, and they're hard to use. Yeah. We had this guy at Westside that could never touch with a certain weight, right? And then something happened to where the bar was misloaded by like 150 pounds, and the person thought it was still, maximum weight, 700 or whatever, and touched it easy. And then we're like, there's some mental shit going on here that it's hard to wrap your head around things like that. I wanted to have you out because most of the content over the past many years, handful of years, has been more gender related. Yeah. And there's training knowledge, nutrition knowledge, competitive knowledge, all this knowledge in here that I told you in the text, it's kind of being lost, through the minutia or whatever you want to call all that. And it shouldn't be, because I don't want to date you, like 40 years experience or some shit like that.
Yeah, pretty much lifting. I started lifting when I was 9 and got serious about it by the time I was 12. So 51 now.
So 9, because I had 13 down. So how'd you start at 9? I
mean, I even started screwing around with weights a little bit younger than that. But, of course, I was just a little kid. But I would sneak. My dad was a skinny little guy, but he had like the set of the old Sears Orbitron, cement weights, and I was just always drawn to it, and I would sneak back there and do like curls or little stuff when I was like 6 years old, and then by the time I was 9, I was like begging for a weight set. Excuse me, and every year for Christmas, I was like, I want weights, please. And then when I was 9, they bought me a set of dumbbells, and I had this, these little DP gold dumbbells. And for an entire year, I trained with them nonstop. And they had the little workout program, did every exercise in the book. I made a chart I hung on the wall in my room and all that stuff. And then the next year they saw that I was serious enough. The next year, they got me a weight set and a bench. And before that, I was using, I had found this, 2x12 we had in the backyard, a couple of cinder blocks, made a bench out of that. There was like a bent bar I found in the woods. I filled up milk jugs with sand. We're loading those on. My dad actually melted down a bunch of lead from old car batteries and made me little 2.5 pound plates. We had like a little dumbbell that you could load up to 50 pounds. But it was just something I was always drawn to and just always wanted to be big and strong. So when they saw that I was passionate about it, something I really wanted to do, they started to support it.
Was the aspiration strength or physique at that time?
I mean, I always kind of wanted both, but performance was more important than physique. I didn't want to be all show, no go. I wanted to be as strong as humanly possible, but I also wanted to look good. I never wanted to be somebody, I wanted to look like an athlete, and so I kind of wanted to be jacked and strong, but strong was more important.
When did powerlifting come into the picture?
High school. So we had a couple high school, and it was always a big thing. So we had what was called the, well, there's different clubs. So it was like there were the smallest one was 700 pound club, then the 850, 1,000, and then it was called Stack Blaster, and that was 1,250 pound total.
Stack Blaster?
Yeah, because it was on one of these old universal machines that had the stacks. And so if you did the stack on all 3 exercises, it totaled 1,250 pounds. And there was a bench press station, a leg press station, and then a shoulder press. So that's what we had to do. And the bench could be on the machine or regular, free weight, but obviously most people could do a little more on the machine. And so my big thing was, and then if you got a t-shirt if you made one of the clubs, and they were all different colors. And then if you made Stack Blaster, you got your photo up on the wall. Did the
shirt say Stack Blaster?
I think it did, but the point is I never got it. Every year, so my freshman year I made the 700 pound club, sophomore year I made the 850 club, junior year I made the 1,000 pound club, and then senior year I wanted that Stack Blaster really bad. But I was focused on sports, and so I for wrestling I had my weight down a little bit. And I just never quite made it. I was super close. And, but yeah, people, especially, once I got to the high levels, right? Once you have a lot of success, everybody, Kroc was a genetic freak, especially once I went over to bodybuilding, had success there too. I mean, I was always a good athlete, definitely above average. But I was not a freak when it came to strength. I was more of a natural runner. I was always really fast. I had good endurance. And I did well at sports, but I wasn't this freaky athlete. I wasn't, I played football, wrestled, and played baseball. And while I was good at all of them, I wasn't all-state in any of them. My senior year, I probably maybe would have been, but I broke my leg during the wrestling season. But I was known as a good athlete, but I wasn't a great athlete. I didn't have any college scholarship offers or anything like that. I mean, in hindsight, I probably could have walked on and played any 3 of those sports. But I realized what I was really passionate about was strength training. I loved the sports, and wrestling was my favorite competition wise. Just the, idea of pitting yourself against one person. It's you and you alone, and just how much energy and effort it took. I really found that rewarding. The losses were the hardest to take, but the wins were the most satisfying. But it was lifting that, no matter what season I was in, I was training year round, and I would be frustrated. My bench went down or my lifts went down when I was cutting weight for wrestling and stuff like that. And then I just realized when I got in the Marines, it was powerlifting that I was really passionate about. And
that was right after high school.
Yeah. Cause the funny thing is I did 2 powerlifting comps in high school, got my butt kicked at both of them, didn't place or do well at either of them.
So were these open or were they high school meets?
High school meets. Yeah. Against other high schools, nobody great, but yeah, I didn't do well at either of them. I was maybe middle of the pack. I didn't place. And, I was known by the time I got to my junior year, cause people don't realize my genetics, I was a skinny kid. My freshman year, I was 5'5" and 118 pounds, and I wrestled 119. But then, I was working hard all through high school, and every year I moved up a couple weight classes. And by my senior year, I was wrestling at 71. Mm-hmm. But I was not a naturally big or strong person, and but yeah, so I basically got my butt kicked at those, and but I really liked it and was just always grinding away. And by my junior year, I had a reputation of Kroc's a lifter, and I was getting for a high school kid, I was getting pretty muscular. And by the time I went to boot camp, when I was in boot camp, everybody was oh yeah, that's the Jack kid, But I was 180 pounds, and I remember at the time, because I had 6 months after I graduated high school before I left for the Marines, and so all I did was train and prepare for that. And I remember the heaviest day I had on the scale was 187. I remember me and my buddies being man, 187, that's so jacked. And it's so funny.
Why did you decide the Marines?
I wanted to challenge myself. And for me, I just always saw the Marines as being a step above everybody else. They had higher standards, tougher qualifications. They had
a sword.
Yeah. Yeah. And once you make NCO or an officer, but it was just, it just had the reputation of being the hardest, the most disciplined. There was also stories about how tough boot camp was and all that. And I just wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to be part of something elite. And I just saw it as a good challenge. And so it was definitely an experience, an entirely different world, but I learned a lot of good lessons there.
Was it tough for you, boot camp?
So it wasn't tough physically. I mean, I was in good shape going in, I was one of the best athletes there, but mentally, it was more of, you have a big culture shock. like until like I realized, I mean, I kind of figured things out like fairly early in, about a month in or so, like, okay, this is a big fucking game. And like they're doing, like it would at first it would really frustrate me because I'm trying 100%. Like I went there with the attitude, I'm going to do my absolute best. I'm going to try to be the best at every single thing we do. And then so like, I'd be trying really hard and getting chewed out constantly. And until I realized it was a game, like they were trying to break me. And so like I got promoted to squad leader pretty quick. And then I got promoted to guide, which people that aren't familiar with the Marine Corps or the military. So in boot camp, we had 4 squad leaders and you'd be in charge of your squad. And then the guide they called him the guide because you carry the guide on the platoon flag and you march in front of the platoon. And then I got promoted to guide, my senior. So you have like a team of drill instructors and you don't know this right away, but they each have like a separate role, like a kind of a role they play. You have one who's a heavy, who his job is basically be a dick and be mean as hell the entire time. And you have other ones that play certain roles. Then you have a senior, and the senior he's in charge of everybody, and he's already been a drill instructor for a long time. And he's kind of supposed to be like a mentor and a father figure. But our senior was like loved being a heavy, and he was still mean as fuck. And his name was Staff Sergeant Grayvald, but he was a jack dude and he was strong. And I think he kind of saw, himself in me. And so kind of like I won't say he favored me, but definitely liked like the effort I put in and the attitude I had. And he just saw me kind of get into it with some other recruits. And like initially, you don't know, it's a totally different world. You don't understand all the rules. You don't know how things work. And they purposely break you down and make you feel like you're a complete moron and you don't know anything. And then they build you back up. And by the time you graduate, you think you can conquer the world. And it's a very effective system. But it took me a minute to realize like some of the stuff was a game and what the goals were and what they were trying to do. And part of that was, like when I became guide, there was like one day in particular, every fucking thing I did was wrong. And they were just fucking with me nonstop. And what they were trying to do, like a big thing is what they would call is keeping your bearing or your discipline. And no matter what the situation is, you need to keep a cool head. And they were basically trying to make me freak out and lose it. And so like everything I did that day, if I'm marching too fast. Then I'm marching too slow. Oh, you're weaving to the right. You're weaving to the left, and they're just yelling at you like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Can't you do anything right? And then we'd go into our classes and I'd place the guide on holder. I come out, it's thrown in the mud behind these bushes. And then it's my fault. And, you're disgracing our platoon. And just so I remember marching with the guide on and it's got a big pointy thing on the end of it. And in my head, I'm just envisioning it, ramming it right through my drill instructor's guts. I'm getting so pissed. And I didn't realize that day that they were trying to break me. And I was getting so angry and so frustrated. But yeah, they just wanted to see if I would freak out when they pushed all my buttons. And fortunately I didn't, but I hadn't realized like that's what the object was, to see if I could maintain my bearing under like as much stress as they could throw at me. And so the mental stuff was, took a minute to get used to. But once I realized like, okay, there's an objective with all this stuff and I just need to stick to what I'm supposed to do and do it to the best of my ability. And then they taught us too, like in combat, it's better to do the wrong thing 100% than to do the right thing 50%. Like if you maybe have the right plan, but you do it half-ass, you're going to get more people killed and be less successful than if you have another plan that maybe isn't as good, but you go at it 100% and you're unrelenting. So it was, yeah, I mean, it's a different world with a different rule set. And the other thing boot camp really did for me, and I don't know, some people probably wouldn't see this as a good thing, but my natural, personality, my natural instincts is overall I'm a pretty kind person. Like that's just how, who I am. And I never had a mean streak in me before I went to boot camp, but then I realized it's a very valuable tool and, applied in the right way, it can be a great aid. But that brought that out in me. It brought out an aggressive, like I was always very competitive and I was already like hardworking and stuff, but I didn't have that mean intensity, that aggression. In boot camp, it cultures that. Obviously, they're training you for war, So, so it brought that out in me. And then I realized like, if I can channel this and use this is a valuable tool. And obviously that came out a lot in my powerlifting later. Like anybody who ever saw me compete, that was something I could channel and focus and bring out and shut down when I need to. And, but in boot camp, yeah. And I was just put in some situations. So like I said, my senior, he kind of like like some of the other drill instructors, I don't think liked it because I think they could tell that like he favored me a little bit. And he just saw me do some things. Like one time we're doing sprints around a track and he's leading the whole thing. And this is like, and sometimes usually you just did stuff as your platoon, but sometimes we would do things with our series, which was a series of 3 platoons. And so there was inter-platoon rivalry for sure, like 100%. And I was considered kind of like right away, I kind of stood out as like the tough guy from our platoon. And each platoon seemed to have like one badass that was like their main dude who was like unofficially, you were considered like the enforcer. Your job was to keep the other recruits in line. And if there was a fuck up, you were the one they sent to put them back in line. And a lot of times it was kind of like an unspoken thing, but they would do stuff like pull guys out. And like when we do fighting in the pits and stuff, like they would match me up with guys that were shitbirds and basically just let me beat the shit out of them. Like no rules. And they wanted that. Like, and, but it was all kind of like hinted at and spoken in code. Like they wouldn't come out and tell you like, I want you to beat the shit out of this guy, but it'd be things like my senior would pull me aside and be like, a lot of things can happen in the pit and we're training today. And if so-and-so is there and you're there and he happened to get injured, that would be unfortunate, but I think he needs to learn a lesson. So it'd be stuff like that. And so it kind of brought those things out and I learned how to channel those things and helped me in my competitive career later on. And, but yeah, it was the mental aspect that was more challenging than the physical aspect for me. I mean, obviously, we worked our ass off and there was a lot of stuff, but like I said, I was already a good athlete and I had trained very hard going in. So I was in good shape when I got there.
So once you got through boot camp, how did you go about your own training for powerlifting?
I trained nonstop. So like, that's a funny thing. Like in boot camp, you had 1 hour a night of what we called square away time. And in that time, you had to, press your uniform, polish your boots. It's the only time you could shit, shower, shave. It was the only time that you could go to the bathroom without having like a 15-second time limit. During the day, we'd get like quick bathroom breaks, like 15 seconds after lunch, whatever. They'd tell you, you got 2 minutes. And then you'd fall off line, you'd run to the head. That's what we call the bathroom. And then you'd hear them yell 60 seconds. And then you got 10 guys all standing around a urinal trying to go at the same time there. And then they'd start counting down 10, 9, 8, and then be 3, 2, 1, and you better be back. So you'd learn you had like 10, 15, 10 seconds, whatever, to go and get back. And so like that, anyway, that hour that was, and if you wanted to write any letters home or anything like that, that was the only time you had. But I would hurry up and do all that stuff as fast as I could. And then I would spend another 30 minutes training. A couple of our drill instructors had brought in a small set of weights and then what they called our whiskey locker, which was like a small room that had all our cleaning supplies and stuff in there. And I would spend 30 minutes every night, like lifting, and everybody like, were like, what the fuck, man? Like we're doing shit all day long. Like, I'm like, I don't want to regress. I want to maintain as much strength as I can. And and I think my senior, they saw stuff like that. And I think they were like, okay, this kid really wants it. And they just saw things like, like I said, the aggression part. Like I started to tell the story. We were doing sprints around the track and there was the kid, the badass from this other platoon, his name was Reese. And he was like a big, tall, athletic kid. And we're doing sprints and him and I are side by side. And we're kind of, it kind of gets one of those things. We kind of start elbowing each other and it's getting more and more aggressive. And then every lap until the last one, we couldn't pass my senior, but him and I are just kind of, and we're both getting more irritated with each other and kind of pushing and shoving the whole time. So then my senior turns, he's like, on the last sprint, the last 400, he's like, if you can pass me, go ahead. And, so a group of us that were kind of the faster kids, we get ahead of him and me and Reese are just like start elbowing the fuck out of each other. And then he's shoving me, I'm shoving him back and he's on the inside of the track and I'm right outside him. And then finally, like 3/4 of the way around the track, I just get fed up and I just grab him and throw him head first into the turf in the infield. And he goes sprawling and does like a scorpion. And I just keep sprinting around. And then in my head, and I know my senior's right behind me, I'm like, fuck, is that a good thing or not? Like, was I not supposed to do that, what I did? But when I got done, I turned back and he had a big smile on his face and he was kind of like, fuck yeah, and then I realized like, okay, they want aggression. They want these things, but there's times where it was appropriate and times where it wasn't. And sometimes it was hard to know like when it was okay to let that side out and times when you need to maintain your bearing and be in control.
Yeah. So what time in your military career were you sneaking into the weight room?
All the time. But like one of the stories I've told a lot of people was, so I was stationed at the Marine. Once I got recruited into presidential security, for people who never followed my career, It was a long process, but then once you're recruited into this program, you spend time in Washington D.C. at what's called the 8th and I Barracks. It's the oldest barracks in the Marine Corps. It's where the silent drill team is, the marching companies that do parades in D.C. And there's a group of Marines called the Body Bearers that do all the funerals for like high-ranking like generals and stuff like that. And so it's a very PR related. But we were the security company there. We did all the security. We guarded the Commandant of the Marine Corps, who's the head of the Marine Corps. We guarded his home, admirals and generals that worked at the Pentagon, and we also guarded the home of the chief of naval operations, the head guy in the Navy, who was just down the street at the Washington Navy Yard. So we did security for their homes, we did security for the barracks, and that's where you're at until your final top secret Category 1 clearance comes in, because they're doing a background thing on you the whole time you're there, and also you're being evaluated on your performance and all those things. And then once your clearance comes in, you're either sent to White House Communications, which we called WACA, or Camp David, the presidential retreat, and I got selected to go to Camp David. But anyway, while I was at the barracks, we had one good thing about the Marines is they weren't always the fanciest, but they always had pretty decent lifting facilities, and they were made available to us. But the one there wasn't open 24 hours. And, I'm working, security. So we work all different, you'd work split shifts, 4 hours in a day, 4 hours at night. And it'd be 3 to 7 in the morning and 3 to 7 in the afternoon, whatever. And when I'd get off post, I'd want to train in the middle of the night. Well, the gym's locked and everything. So what I would do is there was a master key, and I would swipe it out of the guardhouse, and then I would sneak in there in the middle of the night. And but the thing was, there was a post just outside of that, because it was near the entrance to the one side of the barracks, and we had posts at both of those. And so it was that Marine's responsibility at that post to, maintain security and do everything. And I felt bad because I was putting kind of these guys in a bad position, but I needed to train and I wasn't going to miss training. And I would just go there and I'd basically threaten the guy on duty. I'd be like, look, you say a fucking word, I'll break your neck. And I'm like, I'm just going there. I'm going to train. I'm not going to fuck anything up. I'm not going to cause you any problems. And if something happens, I'll take full responsibility. But, you could see guys be like, oh man, but also I had the reputation enough where most people didn't want to fuck with me. So it was they were like, fuck, I don't really like this, but what am I going to do? And, but I'd be in there and one night I'm in there, it's 1:30 in the morning and I'm squatting, I got all the lights off and I'm trying to be as quiet as possible. Sergeant of the Guard comes around on tour, and it was a guy named Sergeant Bledsoe. And he comes around and all of a sudden I hear the door open and he walks in and I'm there squatting in the dark. And he's like, Lance Corporal Kroczaleski, what are you doing? I said, training, Sergeant. And he's like, okay. And then he just kind of starts BSing with me for a minute. And at first I'm like, fuck, I don't know if I'm in big trouble and then he just looks at me and he goes, why don't you turn the lights on so you can see what you're doing? And then and he walked out, and then I got to know him later on, and he's like, no, he's like, I thought that was good shit. You're in there 1:30 in the morning training, but I might've been unlucky. If it'd been somebody else, they didn't feel the same way. But it was just to me, there was never an option with training, right? It wasn't like, a lot of people would have been like, well, the gym's closed, it's locked. I got to work these hours while it's open and we're doing this other training. I don't have time to train. What am I going to do? To me, that wasn't never a thing. When I was in college, I was president of the weightlifting club and we had our own private gym, which was pretty cool. It was this little dungeon in the basement of the oldest building on campus, had hot water pipes running across top of it. It was hot and humid as hell in there, but I thought it was the perfect environment. But they would lock the building after 8 p.m. when the classes were done. So I would just break into the building every night. Then so I started college single, but by the time I graduated, I was married with 3 kids. My youngest was born when I was on my clinical rotations. And, but I would go to, classes all day. And then I worked as a pharmacy intern in the evening. So I would go to work from 5 or 6 p.m. until 11 o'clock at night when the pharmacy closed. And it was 45 minutes away. I would drive back. I'd get home at midnight or a little after. And then this was actually when I was prepping for my first nationals, APF senior nationals in Detroit in 2000. And I was training alone in the middle of the night, and I would break into the gym every night to break into the building and then to get into the gym. And at first, I'd do is during the day in between classes, I would go in there and unlock one of the windows on the bottom floor, and then I'd climb through the windows at night. And but then they caught on to that, so they started the janitors or whoever was checking all the windows, and all of a sudden they were locked all the time. Well, the building was old, so a couple of the doors, they locked them, but they didn't lock super tight. And I realized if I jerked on them really, really fucking hard, I could pop the door open. And so I did that for a while. Well, then they realized I was doing that. So one day I show up and there's all new doors. doors, all new frames with big solid locks on them. Well, I went back to the car, got a fucking crowbar, pried the door open. And it just, whatever they threw at me, like I found a way around it. And one time I actually shattered a door. I didn't mean to, but it might've been the first night they had the new locks on there, and like, I'm like, fuck, can't get in that way. And I knew there was another door like in a little like arboretum area, but it was all glass with a metal frame around it. And this was actually on Christmas break, and it was like cold as shit out. And so I'm jerking on this door really, really hard, and then the glass shatters, and I'm like, oh fuck. And fortunately, like no alarms or anything went off, and I went in and trained, and I figured, you know, well, if security shows up or cops show up, I'm just going to explain myself. Whatever happens, happens. Nobody said anything. I don't think they realized at the time, but then there was an article in the school newspaper like a week later about vandals breaking into the building, but they couldn't understand nothing was stolen and nothing was stolen, nothing was damaged. And but I was just thinking, if you guys would just leave me the fuck alone, like just give me a key and let me in. But like in my mind, like, you know, like the majority of people would say, well, the building's locked and the gym's closed, like I can't train. And the only time I had was the middle of the night. So, but no, I was just like, no, there's a fucking way. And so no matter what, I was going to find a way in there, and I was going to train. And I'll tell you what, in the middle of the night, I mean, I'd get in there. Yeah. At 1 o'clock in the morning, do you think I felt like training? No, I wanted to go to bed. I had to be up early in the morning for classes, but nationals were coming up, and I knew like my goals, and I had always, like, in the back of my mind, I always had wanted to be number one in the world. But I didn't start talking about that until I was almost there, but that was always the goal. And I'm like, first thing is I need to be the best in the state. Then I need to be the best in the country. And then I need to, you know, eventually work to there. But it was, you know, as you know, it was a long process and took me a long time. But I'm like, you know, this is what champions do. This is what separates me from everybody else who's trying to beat me.
How was your training set up during the military and the college time, because you're on a time restraint? Yeah.
So then honestly, like back then it was more of like kind of what I guess we call today like a power building type program. It was like more of a bodybuilding split, but with heavy bench, squat, and deadlifts, you know, included in it. And I would train, you know, it just depended like where we were at. Like when we were in the field, I would do things like I would be doing, you know, chins off, you know, pull-ups and stuff off tree branches, and tons of push-ups with loading up my pack with as much weight as I could. And I would do what I called towel workouts, where I'd get a couple of my buddies who were really into lifting, and we would like put our feet against each other and then do rows back and forth, or do curls like that, whatever we could, you know, do diamond push-ups and stuff. And, you know, so just, you did what you had to do. And,
well, say if we're looking at training for the nationals, like how was that? Cause you have to peak for that. You have to do something. So how was that?
I would still like, so even back then, like I kind of realized what worked really well for me was a 16-week block, and I would do it in 4-week waves. And I got a lot of it from Louis' old circa maximal phase. And the first time I had tried that, incorporated bands, I made really good gains. And then over the years, I kind of stuck to that basic platform of having this, you know, progression over 3 weeks, a deload week, and then each wave was progressively heavier than the previous wave. And I would take all my heavy singles and everything.
Are you looking to boost recovery, enhance your sex drive, and improve performance in the gym? Do you think your hormones are out of whack and you're tired of getting the runaround from your doctor? You know, things like your hormones are just fine, stop lifting heavy weights, etc., etc., etc. I know what that feels like, as I've been down that road most of my life. This is why we've partnered with Merrick Health. Merrick Health is a premium telehealth platform that specializes in hormone optimization and preventative medicine, ensuring a better quality of life. Merrick Health offers a table talk panel tailored for our listeners, featuring comprehensive tests like total and free testosterone, sensitive estradiol, and advanced markers like lipoprotein A and IGF-1. These comprehensive panels of up to 84 carefully selected biomarkers allow you to identify areas of enhancement and maximize your physical, cognitive, and sexual performance. It's much different than the panels you may get from your doctor. Choose between self-service options where you can select lab panels based upon decades of experience, or opt for guided optimization with your own health coach. Start with a detailed breakdown of your labs and receive personalized treatment options, both over-the-counter and prescription. Visit merrickhealth.com/tabletalk and use the code TABLETALK to get 10% off your first order. Merrick Health isn't just about better health, it's about empowering you to take control of your well-being. Summer's here and so is the heat. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym, it kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link. Are you tired of sleeping hotter than hell? This was something that I used to complain about all the time. And a few years ago, when I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, he referred me to the Chili Pad from Sleep Me. And let me tell you, it was a game changer. This is why I'm thrilled to announce today's sponsor of the podcast is Sleep Me. The Sleep Me Chili Bed cooling system lets you customize your sleeping environment to your own optimal temperature, ensuring you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. As you've heard on the podcast, if not every podcast, performance isn't just about how hard we train, it's how you recover, and sleep is vital. The Chili Pad creates a cool surface, ensuring temperature no longer disrupts your sleep. It's a water-based mattress topper that works with your existing mattress and lets you control the sleep temperature from 55 to 115 degrees. Imagine falling asleep quickly, staying asleep, and waking up fully refreshed. This isn't just about escaping the heat. It's about enhancing your recovery, boosting your energy, and sharpening your mental edge. Whether it's just you or you and a partner, Chili Pad can be customized to suit each person's temperature preference. Visit www.sleep.me/tabletalk to get your Chili Pad and save up to $315 with the code TABLETALK. This offer is available exclusively for Table Talk listeners and only for a limited time. Order today with free shipping and try it out for 30 days.
2 weeks out, and then the last week was a deload before the meet, and I found that worked really, really well for me and my training partners, and even my clients today. Like, I still use that same basic template, but it's been tweaked and tweaked and tweaked over the last 20 years, keeping what works and getting rid of what doesn't. But yeah, it was Louis' circa maximal phase that I kind of built my whole training philosophy off of.
And that was with all three lifts?
Yeah. Yep.
So then where was the deadlift in this rotation? Was it with the squat?
No. So I actually trained deadlift on a separate day. For me, like, I never did like the big three together. They were always on separate days. I found that, like, for the way I trained and the intensity I tried to put in, like, I wasn't gonna be able to bring that like with the same three all in one day, not consistently. And I just found that my body got too beat up. So I had a bench day, a squat day, and a deadlift day. And then, but yeah, so I'd build them all up over a 3-week period, deload week. And then on my deload week, I wouldn't deadlift. And then actually later in my career, when I made my best gains in deadlifts, when I first started pulling over 800, I had found that, like, I got stuck like in the low mid 7s for a while. And I kept blowing out my lower back, kept tearing up my back. And then I finally realized, like, I went back, looked at all my training logs. I'm like, what's going on here? And I realized it was when I'd been doing a bunch of heavy lifting, and I had all my best deads in competition when I'd had an injury before the meet and had to deadlift less. And then I was like, well, fuck, I need to decrease the volume. And so I started pulling only twice a month. I would deadlift on my first week of my 4-week block and the third week. And then I would take the second week off and the fourth week off. And I put like 80 pounds on my deadlift in a year. And this is when I'd already been competing at a high level. Mm-hmm. I made, massive improvement there, just deadlifting twice a month. And that's like when I pulled over 800 for the first time. And then my back injuries, like, not that I never had one going again, but like substantially reduced. And what I found, and it's funny because people, are always like, oh, when you're taking gear, you recover so much better and your training volume can be more. And I actually found, for me at least, and actually most of my training partners too, that we did better with less volume as we got stronger, because when you're squatting 1,000 pounds in training all the time, it's way more demanding on your body than when I was squatting 500. So I found when I was hitting these really big weights, I needed less volume and more recovery time.
How did the nationals go in Detroit?
Good. So it was my first nationals, and I was still drug free at this point, and I placed in the top 3, and that was my goal, to medal there. And I squatted over 800 for the first time, and I totaled over 2,000 for the first time. And those were my big goals going in. So I hit all my goals. I remember my middle son Garrett was only 3 weeks old, and he was there in his little car seat while I was lifting. And but yeah, so that it went well, and things worked out. And like I said, I remember like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I would actually, and this is going to sound, I don't know, it probably sounds like some bullshit ad or something, but I'd be alone in the basement all by myself, and like I'd get down there and I'd be exhausted. And, but I'd look in the mirror and I would have these little conversations with myself, and I'd be like, come on, you fucking pussy. Like, you really want this shit? You're talking about it. Let's see if you can fucking do it. And it would just, I'd get myself worked up. And then once I got going, once I got into the sets, I always felt great, but it was like, getting down there at 1 a.m. and being exhausted and getting going was a challenge. But I would just always, talk to myself, have these conversations and be like, okay, you talk a bunch of shit. Let's fucking prove it.
So how did you balance out those days when you do need to pull back and the days that you have to convince yourself?
That took a while, right? Like, and as you know, and I'm sure you've been in the same place millions of times, it's like knowing when to, you fuck yourself up enough times, you realize like, okay, I should have been smarter there. I should have pulled back, but it's a tricky thing. And a lot of it's just figuring out your body, figuring out your limitations. But like people like us, like, we want no limitations, right? Like, no, there's never an excuse, right? Like, it's always it is tricky, like figuring out when to dig down, when, like with injuries and stuff. It's like, I tell a lot of my newer clients that are just really getting into powerlifting and they start getting banged up. And I'm like, get used to it, because this is the way it's going to be. If you want to be really, really strong, now, if you're just doing this for fun, you're doing it for a hobby, or you're doing it for general health, that's a different thing. But if you want to be a competitive lifter, and if you have big goals, you're going to be banged up all the time. There's always going to be little stuff. And it's the same way with jiu-jitsu. You're always going to be hurt. If you took a day off every time you're hurt, you're never going to fucking train. So it's like, but you have to figure out how to train around those things, and what injuries you can push through, and which ones you need to train around, and when you need to shut things down. Like, knowing like when you feel a twinge in your pec or something, and being like, oh shit, like, is a tear about to happen? Maybe I need to shut it down for a day. And then you learn the hard lessons. I've had 5 surgeries to repair lifting injuries. I've torn off both biceps, both triceps, and now my right quad tendon. So yeah, sometimes sometimes you cross that line, you push a little too far, but then there's things too, like, sometimes there's this idea that if you have perfect technique and you do everything right, you're never going to get hurt. And that's simply not true. The stronger you get, the higher the level gets, and the harder you push yourself, injuries are going to happen. Like, it's part of it. And I think often what separates people at the very top is who can deal with those injuries and who can't. It's like, how many times we see somebody who's a really talented lifter, but everything's kind of come easy. Then they get to the highest levels. They've never had any real adversity. They have one bad injury, career's over. They never come back, because mentally, every time they get under that bar, all they can think about is, shit, my patella tendon's going to blow off again, or my back's going to blow out again. But for somebody like me, who was a grind the whole way, and I had lots of little injuries and lots of stuff, that was just part of the process. Like, for me, I said, hey, it's a bump in the road. I don't fucking care. Like, I mean, when I went into the Arnold the one year, I think it was 2007, I had partially torn my tricep like 2 weeks out doing my last heavy singles. My arm was black and blue from my shoulder to my elbow. And my mentality was, I don't give a fuck. Like, I just hope it holds together for at least one lift. Let me get one bench in. And the funny thing is I actually ended up PRing on bench that meet. And it did tear a little bit more. It was more discolored, but it held together. And then it blew out on me like 3 years later during a photo shoot. But it was just, like, at that point in my life, the risk was, greater than, or the reward was worth the risk. So it was just like, but yeah, you try to be smart about it, and you learn from it. And, but inevitably some things are going to happen, and and try to learn from other people's mistakes too, not just your own. How did your training change after you graduated? Not a whole lot, really. I mean, I continued to probably the same thing. I was fortunate to have some really good training partners during that period. And that was like in the mid 2000s. And like when you and I met, and you brought me on, and, I won the Arnold, and, became a world. And it was funny becoming a world champion for the first time, because it went from being like a local lifter who only the locals knew to all of a sudden, like everybody knows who you are. And that was kind of an adjustment. But my training it just continued to evolve. I always said training is an evolution, not a revolution. Like people who are like program hoppers, if you're going to completely change everything every 16 weeks or whatever it is, it's so hard to figure out what works, what doesn't. Like it's so hard to learn from that. And I was always a big proponent of, you keep what works, you try new stuff. If it works, you keep it in. And if it doesn't, you throw it out. And then you're constantly tweaking. And as your strength evolves and your body evolves and things change over the years, there's going to have to be some evolution there too, to accommodate different things. The best program for you when you're at one point in the career isn't going to be the exact best program 5 years later. So it's always constantly evaluating and tweaking, and it's constantly changing. But I like I said, I found a really good system that worked really well for me and my training partners and my clients. But there's a lot of it too is, program matters, and it's important to, you've got to have some kind of progression. You've got to have some kind of deload in there. And there's a certain way to peak for a meet that works really well. And some people do not. A lot of coaches, that's the biggest thing I find, is very few coaches understand how to properly peak an athlete for a meet. Like it's still a mystery to so many people. And that was one thing I felt like I was lucky and kind of figured out early on. But there's just but if you're completely jumping programs, you never figure anything out. You never learn anything. And I think that's one of the big problems with the current culture of everybody has a coach and you just follow your coach's program. And then when things aren't going perfect, you switch to another coach and they have a completely different style of training. And the thing is, not only is it so hard to learn that way, is that most athletes anymore aren't even trying to learn. It's like, well, I'll just hire a better coach. And sometimes it's like, well, maybe you just needed to stick it out and you didn't give it enough effort, or maybe you're not doing all the things that it takes. Like I said, a good program matters, but effort, consistency, and the mindset you have are more important than having the perfect program. If you look at all the champions, and this is one thing I always did, was I was always studying all the best people, and not just in powerlifting, like in all sports. I was like, what do these people have in common? What separates them? And a lot of it was mindset. They have an unshakable belief in themselves. They have a confidence that that no matter what, they're going to come out on top. Their work ethic is top notch. They're willing to suffer and do more than everybody else. And yeah, sure, there's some genetic freaks that, but those are the exception. Those aren't the rule. The top chain of the majority of the best athletes in the world were always good athletes, but weren't necessarily the greatest. It was when they were able to persevere. They were able to get around injuries. They were the ones that kept, going when everybody else quit. Because there's a lot of great athletes that get to high levels, but then disappear and never reach the top. And it's because they don't know how to deal with adversity. Yeah,
injuries. Yep. I mean, a lot of things will put people out. So if I'm understanding you correctly on the training aspect, is you stumbled across a template that was working for you pretty early.
Yeah.
And then what changed over the years was not the template, but the inputs that are going into the template.
Yeah.
To where when you're talking about these lifters that will move from coach to coach to coach to coach, their template changes. Yeah. Every single time they move a coach, which is they never learn how to regulate their training.
Yep.
And age will be a regulating factor. Injury is a regulating factor. Strength, the load you're lifting is a regulating factor. And if that one core isn't locked down, then they're fucked. They're limiting what the top potential is going to be.
Yeah.
Because the inputs change. You find what works. You stick with that till it doesn't, then you change that input, and then it just keeps, rolling on down the road from there. Where I see the same thing that you're talking about, you'll see some people that super high frequency, then they get rid of that coach. Then all of a sudden the frequency is now going from 12 squat workouts per month to 4, and it's like, how do you manage all the other variables that kind of play into that?
Yeah.
When you said the mindset, when you were looking at the top athletes, where in powerlifting and strength sports, everybody at the top is going to end up training differently because the input, everything's a little bit different. But the commonalities, even with the genetic outliers, there's still common factors, the mindset being one of those. One of the other ones I found is the ability to auto-regulate, their training is another one. What were some of the other things that you found when you were looking through all these athletes?
Yeah. Like, so I said, like a lot of it, like the confidence, the belief in themselves. Sometimes I would see people like when I was competing that were every bit as had very similar strength levels to me, but never got to that level because they didn't have the confidence. They didn't believe in themselves. So they could put the numbers up in the gym, but not in competition. That's part of it too. Like competition's a difficult thing for a lot of people. And, you get some that are the comp day performers that always can bring more out of themselves. And that's how I was, especially with lifting. But other people that are monsters in the gym. And I had one training partner like that, monster in the gym, and you'd get in competition and you could see the fear in his eyes. We'd be in the warm-up room and he looked nervous as shit. He'd get out there and just open a squat and you could just see the fear. Like it would just freak him out. And he put some good lifts together and stuff, but he never reached his potential because he could just never get past the anxiety of competition. And that's something that's difficult to teach people. I mean, some people are just wired that way. Some people learn it. It is a skill that you can work on and develop. And then sometimes you have it during your career and then something happens and you lose it. That happened to me when I first transitioned to jiu-jitsu. In powerlifting, I would walk into, this might sound arrogant, but I would walk into a world championships or I'd be at the Arnold, I'd be backstage and I would look around and be like, I fucking own this place. Like everybody here, you guys are fighting for second place. Like I felt like no one can beat me unless I fuck up. But that's the attitude I had. Like I just went in there and I was like, no, this is my fucking place and I can do anything. Whatever I need to do, I'll do it. Load the fucking bar. I don't care. And, but it took a long time to develop it. And of course, confidence comes from success, right? So like when the first time, I broke state records and won the state championship or whatever, and then did the same thing at nationals, and that all builds. And then you believe in yourself more and more because you accomplish these things. And I had so many injuries that every time I came back from an injury, it made me that much more, I had that much more faith in my own abilities. Like no injury can stop me. Like the one year, I don't know if you remember this, 'cause I don't know if I talked about it very much, but like a month out, I did something, fucked up my knee and I was on crutches 4 weeks out from the Arnold. And I remember thinking and I went to the doctor's office and they just said there was tons of fluid. My IT band was all inflamed. They really couldn't figure out what I did. They're like, that shouldn't have happened from squatting. And it wasn't like I had like an injury in training, like all of a sudden something popped or anything like that. It was just, all of a sudden, like over a week, it went from being fine and blew up like a balloon. And when I left the doctor's office, they had to wheel me out in a wheelchair. And I'm like a month out from the Arnold. And I'm like, God damn it. And, but I remember thinking, I got home that night and I'm like, damn, is this going to be the one injury that stops me? And then immediately I thought, nope, fuck that. Like nothing's stopping me. And I typed up an email and sent it to some of my closest friends. And cause everybody was kind of concerned about my knee. I was like, I don't give a shit. And I said, I'll be at the Arnold in 4 weeks and I'm going to squat a PR. I don't give a shit. Like if my leg breaks in half, it'll break in half. Like I don't care. And then, who knows what, all physiologically was going on and how much my mental outlook played into that. But I definitely had no fear with it, but it miraculously improved a ton over the next 4 weeks. And I went in and squatted a PR. And
what did you do to mitigate it?
I just it's not a whole lot really. Like I wasn't doing like a bunch of I didn't go see anybody. I didn't go, see some kind of therapist or anything like that. And it was just, it was swollen. And I saw the doc to make sure, they did x-rays and an MRI and basically said, yeah, you've got a ton of fluid. Your IT band's all inflamed. But there was nothing torn. And I just did a lot of mobility stuff right away. And then the next week I squatted light. And then the next week I added, went to moderate weights. And then 2 weeks out, I worked up to a pretty decent single, but still not what I'd planned. But yeah, somehow I walked on stage and it was 100%. I didn't tear anything and it held together. But I had experiences like that a handful of times. And it was just how I always viewed things. And who knows how much of it's coincidence or luck and how much of it was, that my mentality played into that. But the thing was, I had zero fear and I literally didn't care. I was willing to suffer the consequences. To me, it was like, look, I'm going to accomplish these goals no matter what. And if I go in there and my knee blows out or my tricep rips off, fuck it, I'll win next year, but I really didn't care. And I had zero fear going in there. And that was one of the advantages I have because a lot of people, would be like, oh man, I tweaked this or I tore that. I can't compete. And so they would pull out and I just never did, like, unless it was something. I mean, there were, some smaller meets where maybe I screwed something in. So I'd go in and do bench only or deadlift only and then save it for a big meet. But when it came down to like the Arnold or one of the big pro meets or when I was chasing the world record, no matter what was going on, I was going 100%.
So how do you help people develop that type of mindset? There
are certain tricks I use and certain things, like when you get people that like, you can see like the weight scares them, especially like with squats or bench. Like I've been in competition, had athletes and give them the handoff. And before they even take the weight, I know they're going to miss it. You see their eyes get big. You see the fear, even though I know as a coach, like I've been around the sport long enough. I'm a pretty good judge of what kind of strength people have in. I'm pretty good at calling numbers. And I had this one girl who was a really good bencher, and but she had never done more than like 265. And so she crushes 260 on her second. And I'm like, oh, she's got like legit 290 in her. But I knew her well enough to know mentally, like she's 290 will freak her out. So I'm like, let's go 275. And then I saw the look in her face when I told her, and she was a little nervous, but like, I was like, oh man. But when I handed it off, I saw her eyes get big and she just brought it to her chest and didn't even try to push, just mentally, she couldn't see herself at that time. So like when I have athletes like that in training, what I do is I'll do like a lot of overload stuff, like heavy reverse bands and stuff where they're having 100 or sometimes even, depending on how strong they are, maybe 200 pounds more than what they can actually lift on the bar. So like for squatting, they get used to the feel that weight. They get used to seeing all those plates on the bar, and mentally, it gives them like, okay, I've felt this weight before. I've had that on the bar. I've loaded this. It helps them get past that barrier. And so things like that, like overloading or, and then sometimes it's matter to me. Like sometimes it's, you got to kind of know the person too, right? Like sometimes it's pumping up their confidence. Like, hey, listen, man, you can fucking do this. And then I'll list all the rational reasons why. Like, look, you've hit this number, you've hit that. Look how easy your last one was, and just building their confidence over and over again. And sometimes that can really help. And sometimes you just got to get in people's shit too. There's one of the clients I have right now that he laughs and likes to tell people the story, and everybody laughed at him, but he went in, he was deadlifting, and I was in my office and I had him doing reverse band deads, and he got up to what it was supposed to be his top single and he missed it terribly. But I knew it was a mental thing and I didn't see it, but he came to my office and he had filmed it and he showed me his phone, and I'm like, go do it again. He's like, oh, I already unloaded everything, stripped it down. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. I said, go load it back up. And then so he goes back out there and he's loaded all the plates back on the bar. And everybody's like, what are you doing? And he's like, Kroc said, load it back up. And I went out there and stood right there and kind of coached him through it. And I'm like, listen, motherfucker, you can do this. I said, you just got to 110%, rip that fucker off the floor. You get it to your knees. You can lock it out. Kind of talked him through it. He fucking pulled it. And then every time they do something like that, it builds confidence. So like now when I see if his confidence is shook or he's nervous about something, I'll be like, hey, remember deadlift day? You didn't think you could do that shit either. You can do this. But it's not going to work 100% for everyone. Not everybody's wired the same way. And that's not like, it's not fair. And it's not, necessarily a good or a bad thing. Just some things are. And there are some people who are always going to struggle with their confidence. And just, it's really difficult to get them to believe in themselves. And that's going to hold them back as athletes. But like I said, there's like, like overloading stuff, getting them to take, heavier weights through, whether it's reverse bands or, technically like that, like even sometimes like unracks and stuff. I think those have very like limited usage, but sometimes mentally can just help to feel that weight and, pick it out of the hooks and feel 100 pounds more than what you can actually lift. And then like building their confidence and like I said, and then having success breeds success, so if they go in and have a good meet, and I try to be like, I don't believe in the philosophy that your second lift is a 5-pound PR. And well, how the fuck do you know? Like maybe it's a 20-pound PR, but maybe it's not. Maybe you don't have it in you that day. So my philosophy is, you go in with an opener that's, solid, roughly 90% of your max, something I think you can do for like a really hard triple, but you can do on your worst day, sick or dead. I don't want my athlete nervous and scared going out for their opener. I want them, you're going to have nerves, especially before squats, but I want them confident. I want them to know like, okay, I know I can do this no matter what. So even if I kind of fuck this up, I can still get it. So I want them to have confidence. And then I make all the calls. Like I'm aggressive, but not like, I definitely don't, like I'm careful not to overreach, especially like with seconds and stuff. It's like, I want to get first 2 in. Second attempt, I'm trying to get within about 10 pounds of what I think they can actually do, or maybe 20, depending on the lift and how strong they are. I mean, if they're squatting a grand, it's, there can be more margin for error, but something I'm very confident they can do. And I know they think they can do. And then the third, then we're being more aggressive. And I'm usually trying to just undershoot what I think they can actually do by maybe like 5 pounds. And I have a lot of lifters, like for me, I don't care if they go 9 for 9 or 6 for 9. If you went 6 for 9, but that was every pound you had, that's a perfect fucking meet.
Yeah.
The goal is, and I always tell people too, don't look at what anybody else is doing. I don't give a shit what so-and-so squats, benches or whatever. And don't think, well, they hit a bigger bench, so now you do too. No, our goal and the way to get the best total is to get as many pounds as we can until your second deadlift. Second deadlift is when we start thinking about placing. If you're at a big meet, and because it doesn't matter what anybody else do. We're just trying to get all the pounds we can get. We want to get every pound on the squat, every pound on the bench. And then when it comes around to second deadlifts, that's when we start looking at placings. Like, okay, now what do we got to pull? If we're in fourth, what do we need to pull to move up? And then, same thing on your third. If your goal is to win a big meet, if your goal is to, just get stronger in PR, then, we're doing what we can to do that. But some days you're not going to have that. You're not going to PR on all 3 lifts, every fucking meet. And if you think you're going to, you're delusional, unless you're brand new or just got on gear or whatever. Yeah. But it's understanding that process and understanding and the thing is and that's another thing in training, I try to coach my lifters. I don't want you missing lifts in training. I have them work up. I will tell them, leave, we're going up to a heavy single today, but the main lifts are percentage based. So that's controlled, but a lot of their assistant, I'll often have them doing a heavy, a conjugate style second movement or whatever for squats, bench and deadlift. And I'll want them to stop 5 or 10 pounds shy of their actual max, because all those successful lifts help build their confidence. And if you're in training and you're missing lifts all the fucking time, it's hard to be really confident because what misses feel like.
Yeah.
And you go out there expecting that. I don't want them. I want them to expect success every time they get under the fucking bar. I want them to forget what a miss ever feels like. And I want them to walk out there every time believing they're going to do this. And that makes such a huge difference in performance.
We're on the same page with the confidence, because it's, I've said for years that you can see, just as you said with the bench, you can see in their eyes as soon as they pick the whole thing, that, some people need to scream, holler. Some people just need to be controlled. Some people, it doesn't really matter what it is, as long as they're confident when they're under the bar. They can be not confident on deck, sitting in the chair. I mean, they can be as negative as they want to be. It doesn't mean shit.
Yep.
But as soon as they get underneath there, they have to be confident, where we'll see some lifters that are super confident all the way up until that point. And it's maybe you should have just chilled the fuck out, and relaxed and just, I think it was Kurt Kowalski at one of the WPOs, he had a lifter. And this stood out to me because I thought it was one of the greatest things I ever heard, is it was something along the lines of the lifter wasn't confident. And the speech per se that he said was just, in whatever you do in the next 20 seconds, just don't fuck up. You can fuck up the whole rest of your life. You can fuck up beforehand, fuck up after, but in the next 20 seconds, don't fuck up. Just do what you're trained to do. And I thought that was brilliant, right? Yeah. Because that's it,
100%. It's funny you say that, because that's actually a similar speech that I give a lot of my lifters when I can see they're nervous. I tell them, look, you can be nervous in the back room, or you can feel like shit. You'll have somebody after squats, oh, I think I tweaked my hamstring or whatever, and you can tell it's more of a mental thing than a physical thing. But they'll be like, oh, I don't feel good. I said, that's fine. You can not feel good right now. I said, you got to pull it together for 10 seconds, 9 times today. Mm-hmm. So I only need you to feel good and be confident for 90 fucking seconds. You think you can do that? And I'm like, I don't give a shit. You can cry and whine in the fucking warm-up room and you can be whatever. But when you step on that fucking platform, I want you at 100% and fucking giving me everything you have. And it's 90 seconds. That's all I got to do 9 times. Mm-hmm. How hard is that? And you just, try to frame it in a way that helps build their confidence. And you know what? That was one thing early in my career I wasn't good at. If you saw me lift early on, I was a spaz. I was keyed up the whole time. By the time deadlifts would roll around, I was exhausted, mentally, because I'd been have all this adrenaline flowing the whole fucking day. And then one thing I realized early on was that's not a good way to do things. I brought that aggression that I learned in the Marines, but I didn't know how to shut it off. And So then if you watch me like back at the Arnold at like the peak of my career backstage, I'd be laughing and joking around and like you wouldn't even know I was lifting until about 15 minutes before my attempt. Then it was time to flip the switch. Then I got quiet. I didn't talk to anybody. And it just whatever, like I had like little routines in my head that I would go through and I would picture, I did a lot of visualization back then. I would picture like, you know, walk up to the platform, grabbing the bar. I could feel the knurling in my bar. I could smell the chalk. Like I would go through everything in detail over and over again. And I would just always see myself being successful 100% of the time. And then like before I broke the all-time world record, I went back in a corner and I paced back and forth for like 15 minutes and I did the whole visualization thing. And I also reminded myself of every reason I knew I could do this. Every reason I knew I could pull that deadlift, all the training I'd done, all the time I put in. I'm like, I know I'm fucking strong enough. And it was a limit lift for me that day. Like I had cut 35 pounds in like 22 hours and that was the worst weight cut I ever had. And I was more drained than usual. I wasn't 100% and I was kind of banged up, but I was like, you know what? I've done all this. And then I reminded myself all the things that motivated me. And I was motivated by like, you know, everybody's got their things, but for me, like the way I grew up and a lot of other factors, like I had a lot of like people doubted me. I was a, you know, poor kid from a, you know, little town and then being trans and having all this internal stuff. Like I've always had, and I still have a chip on my shoulder about feeling like less. And like the thing that drives me nuts more than anything is being condescended to or having people tell me I'm not capable of something. So it was like those things I would focus on, like every fucking person that told me I would never do this, everybody who fucking doubted me, my wrestling coach in high school who told me I was a piece of shit and sucked and would never accomplish anything. I would bring all those things up that resolve to prove everybody fucking wrong. Cause that's what, you know, was one of the things that motivated me and good or bad, you know, it may not even be a positive thing, but I knew where my insecurities were and I knew how to push my own buttons to bring the best out of me. And those are the things I would do. I'd spend that 15 minutes, you know, visualizing everything, building my confidence, reminding myself why I know I can do this. And then also all the reasons I wanted to do this more than anything on earth.
Now, when you started the visualization, how did you get through the initial phases to where it's hard, you know, to focus? Because there's a lot of people that try and then quit real quick because they don't have control over it, but you got to stick through it.
Yeah.
So how did you go about it?
Yeah. So it's a skill like anything else, right? The more you practice, the more you do, the better you get at it. And I remember in my like a group of friends and stuff, I don't remember who exactly it was, but somebody had talked about an article they read about visualization and how to start with like picturing a shape and then you change the shape of it. Like, so first you picture a ball. Now you make it a square. Now make it a triangle. Then give it texture. Now change the color. Now try to picture feeling it. What does it feel like? Try to smell things. And it's just like anything else. The more you do that, the better you get at it. And then it would be like, you know, picture the object. Now rotate it clockwise, rotate it counterclockwise. And I started doing all these things and got like, okay, I can do that. And then when it got, you know, I'd been lifting my whole life. So like, I know what the bar feels like. I know what the chalk feels like. I know what the bench feels like on my back. And so I would sit there, close my eyes and block everything out and then just go through that. And one of the things I had read, like I had started reading a bunch of articles and stuff about it and, you know, bought books and things like that. And one thing that stuck with me was that it needs to be perfect every time. So if you're going through, let's say you're going through and you're visualizing your bench and all of a sudden you picture yourself missing, scrap it and you start over. You go back to the very beginning again. Now I'm off the platform. I'm walking up. I'm chalking my hands. I'm, you know, lying down on the bench. I'm digging my feet in. I'm setting my traps. Like I'm grabbing the bar. I feel the knurling in my hands. I feel the pressure as I pull it out. Like every little step, every second I'm breaking down. And when I was at the peak of my career, like it felt like I'd already done it. Like it was already over with. And I just had to go out there and then make it happen.
Now with that, do you visualize how you feel after the lift or just the lift?
No, for me, it was just through the lift. I wasn't really concerned about afterwards. It was making it happen. And then, you know, afterwards there was elation. There was, for me, like I'm somebody who that's like one of the biggest highs in the world for me is winning or accomplishing a difficult goal. When I would win a world championship, the rest of that day, I'm on a fucking high. Like it's just, I remember when I won the Arnold the first time, the thing is I wasn't expecting to win that year. I had set my goals. I was confident and very, very confident I was going to place top 3. But at that time, I don't know if you remember Travis Mash. So Mash was kind of had a gap on the rest of us at that point. And he was, like out totaling a lot of us by like 200 pounds. And then I was closing that gap. But like I knew at that point, if he puts his best numbers up and I put my best numbers up, he's going to beat me. And so I was like, okay, top 3 for sure. See if we can get second. But I wasn't like thinking about winning just because it's powerlifting. I know what I'm capable of and I know what he's capable of. But he fucked up. He bombed out in squats and then it was wide open. And then the thing was, then after bench, I think I was in second or third place, but I knew I had the biggest deadlift. Like it was close, but I knew I had the biggest deadlift. People start coming up to me and start telling me, "Oh, you fucking got this. It's over." I'm like, no, fuck no. I haven't done shit. It's not over till it's over. And if you start thinking it's over before it is, that's when you'll fuck up. You'll back off, you'll relax, or you'll be overconfident. Overconfidence is just as bad as a lack of confidence. And so for me, I would never say anything's done until it's actually done. And I was like, no, fuck that. No, I got to go out there and I got to pull all 3 deadlifts. And then I did. But I didn't allow myself to think that I had won until it actually happened. But I remember getting up on stage, and I remember how the Arnold was back then. I mean, we had like thousands of people in the crowd. Place was like electric, and I fed off that energy. But I remember walking out there, all these camera flashes are going off. They've got film crew in your face, and I remember my brain just going. I think it was the first time I ever like went kind of into like a shock where my brain just went on autopilot. Like I didn't know what I was saying, what I was doing, and it was just like overwhelming. And they're handing me this big cardboard check, and people are taking the things. And in hindsight, like I operated normally, like nobody knew that like my brain had just spaced out. But for about a 5-minute period, I was like on autopilot. Like it was just like, whoa, I wasn't mentally prepared for all of that. But then after that, it helped me adjust to those big moments in the future. And, but yeah, at that point in my career, like my confidence was unshakable and I would walk into a world championship, like no doubt that I was going to win. But then when I transitioned to jiu-jitsu, it was funny because I started out with that confidence and had won my first couple competitions. And then I went into one and got subbed, got guillotined for the first time in a comp, shook my confidence. And then like for the next year, I had issues with my confidence going in before going into comps. I started getting really nervous. I felt like I was back in high school. Like it took me back to high school wrestling when my confidence was shit. And I had this similar feeling, all this anxiety before. I mean, it would be so bad. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, but it'd be so bad. Like I'd be at the comp before I had to go, like an hour before I had to go. And I'm like, man, I feel like I don't even want to be here. Like I am so nervous right now. And so like questioning my confidence, questioning my cardio. And like, it was just overwhelming anxiety. And I hadn't experienced that in so long. And it was so weird after I had been so good at that with powerlifting that here I'm coming into another sport. You think I would be able to maintain that. I had all these tools, I had all these tricks, but my confidence got shook. And then the mistake I made was then I started going in there afraid to lose instead of planning to win. And then it was like, well, because I was overly aggressive and I got caught. Like I made a mistake. Took the guy down, put him on his back, was winning, and then got, there was kind of a scramble, got careless, stuck my head out and got choked. So I was like, okay, well, I got to learn from that. Okay, well, don't be overly aggressive. Don't do this, don't do that. It was all of don't do. And then I went out there and I wasn't doing shit. And then I was being really defensive. And then for the next year, I was very up and down. I lost a lot of matches I shouldn't have lost. And the more I lost, the more it shook my confidence. And eventually I turned things around and now I'm back in a pretty good place when it comes to comps again.
How did you navigate that?
Some of it was, just a lot of self-talk, a lot of hard work, and then having success at the comps, right? Like competing. And for me, like jiu-jitsu is not like powerlifting. Like, powerlifting, you're maybe doing 2-3 meets a year. If you're trying to do a lot more than that, it's gonna be really difficult to make progress. You're gonna be really banged up. But with jiu-jitsu, you can literally compete. Like I try to compete once a month. And there's some guys, that compete 50, 60 times a year. They're, like if you're talking matches, but they're competing like, several times a month, like entering competitions constantly. So part of it is exposure, just get out there and get competing. And what I started doing was, in jiu-jitsu, you have gi and no gi. And at that time, right now, our school has transitioned where we only compete no gi and only train no gi. But at that time, we were still doing both. So I was signing up for every single competition, not everyone, because you could literally compete every single weekend if you wanted to, but a lot of competitions competitions, I was signing up for gi, no gi, and then there's something called the open division or absolute. And so if you place top 3 in your weight class, you qualify for the absolute division, at least in the IBJJF, the one major organization. And then you compete. It's all weight classes. It's just open. So it's everybody versus everybody. So I was basically doing like 4 comps in one. I was doing gi and no gi. And then if I placed top 3, then I was signing up for the open. So I was getting as many matches as I could and just, trying to get out there. And you realize a lot of it. It's like with powerlifting, like that first squat's like the big nerves, right? Then you get that, like in football, it's that first hit on the field. And then with jiu-jitsu, it's getting that first match out of the way. And, but yeah, just through repeated exposure and then, hard work and getting better, you get more confident when your skills get better. And then, so like I had more success and just trying to figure things out. And I'm not going to say that I never get nervous when I go out there now, but like also a big thing that helped me too, and I think it helps a lot of people, is not focusing on the outcome. Like thinking about winning and losing, that fills you with anxiety. Like I have to win or I can't lose. Especially with a sport like jiu-jitsu where it's just one-on-one. It's not a team. You can't blame it on anybody else. It's all you. And it takes a lot of guts to go out there, especially when somebody's trying to choke you unconscious or break your limbs. It's not an easy thing to do. And it takes a lot of effort. You're going to get exhausted. You're going to have trouble breathing and it creates a lot of anxiety. And, but one of the things I did that really, really helped was to stop focusing on the outcome. Like don't think about winning and losing. Think about putting in my best effort. Cause when I was so focused on winning, it was too much of, I need to do this, don't do this, that kind of thing, where it was like, no, just go out there, try as hard as you can. Like if you need to be aggressive, I'll take a shot within the first 30 seconds, set it up, don't force it. But I need to do this, is like, just be focused on, putting in a good effort, give 100%, and then be proud of yourself and be satisfied with the effort and don't worry about the outcome. And what happens is you put in the effort, the outcome will take care of itself. And so that removed a lot of pressure and it gave me better performances. Then I was going out there, I was less nervous, less worried about fucking, like, I don't care if I lose. Everybody loses. There's one person in jiu-jitsu right now that hasn't lost in like 6 years, and he's the GOAT. And everyone else, even the very best, lose all the fucking time. And it's just the way games match up. It's very different styles and very different strategies and strengths. And everybody loses. So it's like, don't worry about losing. Just go out there, give your best effort, and then let the outcome is what it is. And yeah, so that made a big difference. And a couple of the other things that really helped me was beforehand, calming myself. So what I started doing, for me, something I always found very calming, was heavy rain and like thunderstorms. I downloaded a bunch of storm sounds. And before my matches now, I put that on. All I listen to is thunderstorms. It blocks everything out. I go outside the venue. I'll go sit in the hallway where it's quiet and there's not a lot of people around. It takes all that, when you're in a competition arena, like you feel that adrenaline, you feel everybody getting worked up. There's lots of chaos. And so I'll go out somewhere quiet and alone. And this is what works for me. Everybody's different. You got to figure out your own thing. But I'll go away from the chaos, listen to the rain, listen to the thunder, and just relax myself. Think about things I need to do. Think about what's important, like my cues. And then when it's right before it's time to compete, then I get amped up a little bit, but not a lot. It's not like powerlifting. If you watch me in powerlifting, I was a fucking berserker, going out there, but that's what worked for me to lift the most weight, but not in jiu-jitsu. You need to be controlled. You need to be cognizant. You need to think. And I found out if I went like hyped up, number one, you're going to burn a lot of energy. And number two, you're going to make poor decisions. So I need to be intense, but focused. And then, so yeah, and those things have helped a lot, but calming myself beforehand. And then like, I have a little routine I do right before I step on the mat. Like I slap my thighs really hard. I do a couple other things that kind of just clear my head, and I go out there and it's like, okay, it's time to fucking go.
Now with the training for jiu-jitsu compared to powerlifting, where powerlifting, you have opportunities to build confidence. Mm-hmm. Do you have those opportunities with jiu-jitsu in training to build the confidence the same way? For instance, you were saying with some of the lifters you help, there's the overload, reverse bands, stuff like that, to be able to build that confidence. Are those things in the training with jiu-jitsu as well that will have correspondence? Yeah,
definitely. So like, success in the training room, right? Like if you're going in every day and just getting the crap kicked out of you every day, it's going to be hard to be confident. And one of the top jiu-jitsu coaches in the world is a guy named John Danaher. And he used to run what they used to call the Danaher Death Squad. And now he teaches at a school in Austin, Texas called New Wave. And he's considered, he says a lot of really good things. But one of his philosophies, which I think surprised a lot of people when he first said this, was that 70% of your roles should be with people at or below your skill level. Because you can't practice new things you're not good at. If you're going against somebody who's better than you, it's going to get shut down. You're never going to work them. You're never going to learn how to do them correctly. So he believes the majority of your practice should be with people that you're better than so that you can learn these new skills and practice new skills. Now, of course, when you first start, you're not even going to have that. When you come in as a white belt or a new blue belt, you're getting your butt kicked by the vast majority of everybody, even if you're a good athlete coming in. And like anything else, there's a couple freaks, but most people, I tell everybody when they first come in, like, don't get discouraged. For the first 6 months, at least 6 months to a year, you're going to get your ass kicked from one side of the room to the other. When I came in, I was 245 pounds and I was getting choked out by guys that weighed less than 150. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? But it's like anything else. You're brand new to it. You got to figure it out and you need to check your ego. And that's one of the things that everybody hates. There's nothing worse with it than like somebody who's fairly athletic and they come in, or especially if they're bigger, and they're total spazzes and they're afraid to lose anything in a roll. Like, listen, you're going to lose. You're going to get choked. You're going to get your butt kicked. You're going to get beat up and you're going to be put in positions that are miserable. And then if you're super spazzy and like trying all this stuff, you're just going to hurt yourself or hurt somebody else. And like, that's the spazzy white belt is the one that everybody tries to avoid. But it's like learning to check your ego, work on the areas you're weak. And even I can be at fault for that too. Like my bottom game, like my being on my back on the floor was coming from a wrestling background and stuff. That's like a place we never felt comfortable. And I avoided it for a while because I was decent at taking people down. I was good on top and I could put a lot of pressure on people. And I realized, actually, I looked back, I've been training for 4 years now. And I went back and I was analyzing all my matches. And I found that every single match that I got the first takedown in, I won. I haven't lost a match in 4 years if I took the other person down first. Every single loss was when I got taken down or I got swept, got put on my back because my bottom game sucked. And so my coach is like, hey, you got to work on this. And I'm like, I know. And so I've been doing nothing, but lately all I'm doing is pulling guard and working on my ground game. And yeah, it sucked. I struggled a little bit with some claustrophobia that I forgot I even had until I got into jiu-jitsu. And then I got big training partners who are way better than me, mounting me, smothering my face in the mat, and I'm exhausted and I can't breathe. And like initially I was like going, like my brain was going into full on panic mode. Like I'm going to fucking die. Like I got to get out of here. And I was really struggling with it. And I thought, well, first, exposure, just keep doing it. It'll get better. At first it got worse, but then eventually it got better. And the more skilled I got at escaping those positions and learning how to get out of there, then I had more confidence and the anxiety was a lot less. Well, okay, now if I get mounted or I get this, I know I can get out of there. And it's going to take some effort, and now it's like, I don't even really think about it that much. I mean, there's still a few moments sometimes if I get tied up in a really tight position, I'm exhausted and you feel like you can't breathe at all. But with jiu-jitsu, worst case scenario, you tap, it's
when did the PEDs come into play for the powerlifting? And I'll preface this question just a little bit because there were a bunch of you that were telling me that you were drug free, and I thought you were all fucking with me. And it was more than just you, it was a handful. Yeah. Actually more than a handful. But then like within the same 24-month period, each one of you would say, hey, I'm thinking about going on. And in my brain, I'm like, motherfucker, you're still pulling this shit. But then the totals all substantially increased. So I had to step back and think, damn, maybe these fuckers were all drug free, up until that certain point. And the numbers showed it. Yeah. So I had to change my perspective on what was capable or what was possible because of that, which was a gift looking back now, because at that time you're like, hell, fuck, nobody can be able to do this shit unless they're taking a boatload of shit. The same attitude that probably resonates today, probably more so even when it did back then. But it was like, there's no, and maybe it's because they were all stronger than I was. And it's like, well, there's no way,
that's
right?
The assumption, right?
Yeah. So at what point did that become one of the cards you started playing?
Yeah. So with me, it's kind of obviously like everybody else, I was tempted, you get into this and you want to be the best and it's always a temptation, but I was making good progress. I was having success and I was like, well, I'm going to hold off longer. And I set it, obviously a bunch of state records. I placed the top 3 at APF senior nationals, at the US APL nationals, and I qualified for the Arnold while I was still drug free. And then, so I got to the highest levels, but I wasn't beating the best people, but I was right there. And then, and the funny thing was, like, just like you said, like, you know, and I told people, yeah, no, I'm fucking lifetime clean. I haven't touched shit. And I found out later, after I did get on and was very open about it, everybody's like, yeah, we thought you were full of shit. I'm like, what do you mean you thought I was full of shit? You're my friends. Like, yeah, but we thought there's no fucking way you're moving those weights. And plus, you know, I was super aggressive and like, you know, I had this, you know, like they're looking at me like, oh, that looks like somebody who's running a gram of Tren, you know? And I had some acne and I always had kind of a fat face. So like, oh, you're bloated, you turn purple. I'm like, yeah, I turned purple because I had 900 pounds on my back. You know? But yeah, I think like people think there's, you know, it becomes an excuse to not be strong. Well, I'm drug free. And then you limit yourself, you limit your things. And the thing is, we don't know what the drug free limits are. I don't really believe in limits per se. I don't think there is a limit, because if you can squat 1,000, why not 1,005? If you squat 1,005, why not 1,010? Like I don't believe in an absolute limit. But the thing is, the people that would be best without drugs end up all, you know, vast majority of them end up all taking drugs. So we don't know what the world would look like if there was no such thing as gear, because we don't ever see that, because the vast majority of those people are at some point are going to cross over, you know, like we say, to the dark side or whatever. And so I was 32 when I ran my first cycle, and that's, it was funny. What actually pushed me over the line, and I'm sure it would have came sooner or later, but was when I had testicular cancer. Because I was drug free up to that point, and then found out I had that, you know, I had surgery and radiation, and then afterwards, then my levels were shit. Like I think I got tested, I was like either 180 or 190, and you know, doc's like, well, you need to be put on replacement, which I was like okay with, and but then now I can't compete drug free anymore, regardless of even it's just replacement levels. So I took about 6 months, and I was just like, man, you know, I can't compete drug free. And up to that time, I was competing everywhere. APF, WPO, whatever. I didn't care. I just wanted to compete against the best people. But then some people from the USAPL at the time, actually, one of the directors of their medical committee was willing to help me petition the board and go to the IOC and all this stuff to try to get that rule changed. But I'm like, look, it comes from the IOC. The IOC is not going to change, you know, all their rules and everything for a sport that isn't even in the Olympics. Like, it'd be a big waste of our time. And then back in my mind, I'm like, you know, maybe it's time to go dark side. And so I took about 6 months, weighed everything, thought about it a lot. And I was like, okay.
So as you're weighing that, because you're a pharmacist as well.
Yeah.
So then how are you weighing that as a pharmacist?
Yeah. So, I wasn't somebody like, you know, you get the guys that are, I don't care if I die when I'm 35, it'll take 10 guys, you know, my size to carry my casket. I never had that kind of thought. I always wanted to live a long life. I always wanted to be there to see my kids and grandkids grow up. I always wanted to have a good quality of life. And that's part of the reason why I'm slimming down and doing things now. So I was never somebody that like all costs, but I was willing to push the envelope pretty far, but I never wanted to put myself in a position where it wasn't like, I didn't ignore blood work. I didn't like do, if something was like, if I got blood work and it didn't look good, then I was changing things. And I always did cardio. I did some form of cardio, and I always ate like a lot better than most of the power lifters. Like I was never somebody who was pounding down Oreos and, you know, eating fast food every day. Like I'd see some guys walk in with McDonald's every day, and it was like a badge of honor for them. And to me, it was like, I'm going to make more fucking gains eating steak and rice than you're going to generate by eating McDonald's. And so I did a number of things to try to mitigate the damage, but it's a difficult thing to know, right? Like I had my blood work done. I was 100% open with my doctor. I was lucky to have a doctor who was understanding, and he didn't like what I was doing, but he wasn't going to get rid of me because of it. And he was going to do what he could to help minimize the damage. You know, we'd get my blood work done every 3 to 6 months. If something came back, like my liver enzymes, you know, like most people came back elevated, you know, 3-4 times in a row. And then he's like, well, let's do an ultrasound on your liver. He's like, okay, everything looks good. There's no problems there. And then I've always been like, I think the most important markers are to watch for stuff for cardiovascular disease and kidney issues. Those are the two things that get people. I have yet to ever see a lifter have a liver failure. And, you know, unless they're like an alcoholic on top of it or doing a bunch of other things, liver's pretty resilient, and liver, you know, will regenerate if you give it a break. But like a lot of people ignore kidney function. It's not something you can feel. It's not something you know is going on until it's too late. And then also a big thing, you talk to any nephrologist, they will tell you that ibuprofen and naproxen are some of the worst things for your kidneys. And a lot of them, they don't believe they should be over-the-counter drugs. They want them to be prescription only. And I know a number of powerlifters have several friends that have fucked their kidneys up and they didn't even know it until they went and got blood work done. And then like a normal serum creatinine, there's slightly different scales, but usually it's about around 1 is what you want to see. Your upper limit or slightly above 1, depending on, what scale they're using. I had a buddy whose creatinine came back at 10 times where they wanted it. And he immediately made some changes, and then basically moved away from like professional powerlifting and, focused on his health. He had a son and he cared very much about, dropped, probably 50 pounds and got off the gear. And his kidney function came down a ton, but it's never going to be like totally normal. He caused some damage that can't be reversed. And fortunately, he caught it early enough where he's probably still going to be fine, live a long life. But I got another buddy who right now is on the verge of needing dialysis, and it looks like it's just holding good enough so he's not going to need it. But he was kind of ran it hard, and like at the time don't give a shit. And but yeah, kidney function's a big one to pay attention to, and the cardiovascular markers. Like a lot of powerlifters have issues with high blood pressure. Yeah, that's not gonna hurt you next month or maybe even in a year, but 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and when you're 25, nobody's thinking about that shit. But when you get to 35, you get to 40, and you start seeing guys having heart attacks when they're 44 and 43, needing triple bypasses and in terrible shape. Fucking shit wakes you up in a hurry. And
did you mitigate that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was lucky. I'm lucky with my genetics in that I tolerated. It took me, I wasn't someone who responded to low doses very well. And some drugs didn't even work for me at all. Like Deca and D-ball didn't do shit for me. And, but I was able to tolerate higher doses. If you looked at my blood work, like my doctors a few times were like, man, I don't know how the fuck your body can tolerate this shit, but it does. And like my blood work would look really good most of the time. I mean, things would be slightly elevated, but nothing overly concerning. But I'm sure part of that was my diet. Part of it was, the extra cardio I did. Part of it was, always being a healthy person. I never drank. I never smoked. I never did recreational drugs. I never popped pills. Like all those things are hard on your body. So I did everything I could to mitigate it. But I went into the mindset I was willing to accept some risk. And I knew, this might someday come back to bite me in the ass. It was just a question of how much and when. And so far, knock on wood, I haven't had any issues. About a year ago, I was having some breathing issues with Jiu-Jitsu, and we ended up doing a whole bunch of tests on my heart. And at first, there was some concern like, oh, maybe this is screwed up or that's screwed up. And then I ended up finding out a lot of them, it was just normal changes that you have with aging. And I've got some, left ventricular hypertrophy, which is normal in strength athletes, especially someone who's taking steroids, but I'm like barely outside normal limits. And I'm at 51, I'm rolling with 25-year-olds every day, and I can keep up with everybody just fine. But yeah, then at that point I was like, when the first kind of couple things came back, and I was having these weird issues with breathing when I was grappling on the mat, and I'd put on more weight again and gotten bigger, and that was part of it. And we're still trying to figure out exactly what's going on. It seems to be some exercise-induced asthma, and there might be some other things. I'm probably going to get referred to a pulmonologist here soon. Like it's not stopping me from competing or anything, but sometimes it's more of an issue than other times. We really haven't been able to nail down exactly what's going on, but it doesn't appear to be anything related to my gear use or anything. But yeah, it made me wonder for a minute, well, is this, are the hens coming home to roost, and if it was, but fortunately I did everything I could to mitigate those things. And so far I've been lucky, and I hope to live a long life and be in good health till my last day. But it's a risk. And that's what people need to understand too. There's no free lunch. You don't get to like run a bunch of gear and not have any consequences. There's going to be consequences. Like no matter what, I mean, I lost all my hair. I didn't lose a single hair until I started running gear. And then in about 3 years, it was substantially thinned. And that's one of the prices I had to pay. But yeah, a lot of it's, like I said, pay attention for people who are listening that are running gear, considering running gear. There's no free lunch. There's going to be effects. It's hard on your body, and the further you push it, the harder it's going to be. And if you're in your early 20s and you're thinking, fuck it, I don't care. Think about it long term. Think about it because it's hard to do when you're young. Number one, you feel invincible. Yeah. Number two, it's really hard to picture yourself when you're at later in life. But those years come faster than people think. And if you want to have a family, if you want to have kids, you want to be around and you want to be able to do things like, I go mountain biking all the time. I do all this stuff. I'm still able to live a full life. And then I know some other friends who are lifters, were big guys, never dropped the weight, had a heart attack when they're in their 40s. And now they look like shit and they can't do anything. And they're like seriously debilitated, and they're not even 50 years old. Most people are going to have a long life, and it's good. What's that quality of life going to be? And the thing is too, like for powerlifting, And I'm not someone who says, well, if you're not making a career out of it, it doesn't matter. If you're not getting rich off it, it doesn't matter. To me, there's a lot more important things in life than money. And yeah, and it, maybe it's worth more risk if you did make the kind of money where you can retire 5 years from now and live off of the rest of your life. But regardless, if it's something that's super important and super fulfilling for you, that's a good thing and that's important. But also like you got to weigh everything. You got to think about later in life, and there's going to be a toll to pay, and is it going to be a small toll or is it going to be a big toll? And there's too many people that find out like way too early. Like I said, I've got a couple close friends that both have kidney damage. Look at all the bodybuilders that have died in the last 5 to 10 years. It's ridiculous. Like it's getting out of control. And then like guys that used to post videos bragging about how much gear they take, now they're fucking dead.
Yeah,
and they didn't even make 40 years old. Like it's no joke.
Well, you've lived through a time that it's interesting with the PEDs, because for the longest time it was just a conversation that was avoided. Right? We all had ways to pivot around it. We're not lying. We're just not being transparent either. Yeah. So you just pivot around it, and then we've come into this age to where it's talked about more than it's ever been talked about, which has pros, but it's got cons. Every pro has a con, and the con would be people are getting on sooner and they think that it's a necessary process, especially, women starting Anavar for the first powerlifting meet because they just think that's what they're supposed to do. But it's been an interesting time, to kind of live through, especially when you live through it all and you're at an age where you see the consequences, or you personally have had the consequences, but you see it through friends that we've all had, that are now in their 50s or older, that is exactly what you just said. We're seeing the consequences of that. And I think that when we're younger, we're cool with if I die, I die. Right. But you think it's going to be a sudden death.
Yeah. You think you're going to be at 100% until that last day. And you're just going to go away and it'll be okay. Yeah. It's not how it works.
No, you don't see the 3 years or 4 years or whatever that you're going to be on dialysis or, have heart issues and, everything just kind of goes to shit, but you're still alive. You're still alive,
but you can't do shit. It's hard to breathe. You're uncomfortable. You feel like crap. That's to me, like I watched my dad. My dad was a lifelong smoker, started smoking when he was like in his early teens, and chain smoke. My dad was the type of person, there was always a cigarette lit. When one went out, he lit the next one. And, as a kid, I was always very health conscious. So I harped on him all the time, but he didn't give a shit. Oh, my grandma smoked non-filters till she was 85, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what happened? My dad got to his 60s, emphysema, COPD, and lung cancer. And at the very end, the COPD took him out before the lung cancer could, even though it was growing rapidly. He died from the strain it placed on his heart. But at the end, he was basically suffocating. Like it was fucking miserable. To me, that would be the most terrifying thing ever. He couldn't even get up from the chair and go and make it to the bathroom before he would be too exhausted. Like he started having accidents because he physically couldn't go 10 feet. Like he'd sound like he ran a marathon. He'd take a couple steps and then be breathing and wheezing. It sounded like he was choking to death. And it was just like, there's consequences for the shit you do. And watching him those last couple of years, like as his breathing got worse and worse, it was fucking miserable. And he told me, he actually texted me the night before he died. And he said, I can't do this much longer. He's like, this is, what were the exact words? But he basically was like, the essence of what he said was, I can't tolerate this much longer. And I remember thinking in my head, probably not going to have to. But and then I got a call the next morning that from the hospital, he was dead. He went into cardiac arrest and died while the ambulance people were there trying to resuscitate him. But all that cigarette smoking stuff came back and it was a miserable, like you said, it wasn't, one day I'm here, one day I'm gone. It was a slow decline over about a 10-year period. And those last several years were fucking miserable. Like he couldn't do anything. He was confined to a couch. Like I said, how he must have felt like, having accidents and because he can't even make it to the bathroom. Like what a miserable way to go. Yeah.
Now the one positive with the more talk about this is you were fortunate that you had somebody to do the laps.
Yeah.
You know, and knowledge to be able to kind of read them yourself, where that back then you might have been the only one.
There weren't a lot. Yeah.
You know,
it wasn't most time. If you told a doc back then, most docs were going to just lecture you about how stupid you are, how you're going to die, way overinflate everything, and then refuse to help you. And I had a couple of buddies who tried being open with their docs, and they either one of them, like I've known docs that would just discharge them as patients, like aren't going to see them anymore. And then other docs that would just blame every single thing they had going on the gear. Oh, they came in with like, you know, a cold. Oh, it's because the steroids ruined your immune system. It was just like ridiculous. But none of them would, like, you know, they were going to order blood work and stuff like that. And I would just tell them, you know, like, keep trying, get a different doc. And fortunately there's some, and I'm fortunate again to have a guy right now that I do all my hormone stuff with, you know, for transition and all that. And he's very open-minded and you know, very willing to work with me on stuff and understands, like, I'm very open about my whole history. He knows, like, he knew of me as an athlete before I came in. So he knows what my body's been through and stuff, and does everything he can to help me. And,
well, there's companies like Merrick Health now, you know, and that will help mitigate, you know, or help people just get on to start with, which is, how awesome would that have been, you know, 30 years ago, you know? So that's one of the positive that's kind of stemmed out of this as well. Let's take a break real quick and fix this static in the headphones, Owen. Are you looking to boost recovery, enhance your sex drive, and improve performance in the gym? Do you think your hormones are out of whack and you're tired of getting the runaround from your doctor? You know, things like your hormones are just fine, stop lifting heavy weights, etc., etc., etc. I know what that feels like, as I've been down that road most of my life. This is why we've partnered with Merrick Health. Merrick Health is a premium telehealth platform that specializes in hormone optimization and preventative medicine, ensuring a better quality of life. Merrick Health offers a table talk panel tailored for our listeners, featuring comprehensive tests like total and free testosterone, sensitive estradiol, and advanced markers like lipoprotein A and IGF-1. These comprehensive panels of up to 84 carefully selected biomarkers allow you to identify areas of enhancement and maximize your physical, cognitive, and sexual performance. It's much different than the panels you may get from your doctor. Choose between self-service options where you can select lab panels based upon decades of experience, or opt for guided optimization with your own health coach. Start with a detailed breakdown of your labs and receive personalized treatment options, both over the counter and prescription. Visit merrickhealth.com/tabletalk and use the code TABLETALK to get 10% off your first order. Merrick Health isn't just about better health, it's about empowering you to take control of your well-being. Summer's here and so is the heat. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym, it kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link. Are you tired of sleeping hotter than hell? This was something that I used to complain about all the time. And a few years ago, when I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, he referred me to the Chili Pad from Sleep Me. And let me tell you, it was a game changer. This is why I'm thrilled to announce today's sponsor of the podcast is Sleep Me. The Sleep Me Chili Bed cooling system lets you customize your sleeping environment to your own optimal temperature, ensuring you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. As you've heard on the podcast, if not every podcast, Performance isn't just about how hard we train, it's how you recover, and sleep is vital. The Chili Pad creates a cool surface, ensuring temperature no longer disrupts your sleep. It's a water-based mattress topper that works with your existing mattress and lets you control the sleep temperature from 55 to 115 degrees. Imagine falling asleep quickly, staying asleep, and waking up fully refreshed. This isn't just about escaping the heat. It's about enhancing your recovery, boosting your energy, and sharpening your mental edge. Whether it's just you or you and a partner, Chili Pad can be customized to suit each person's temperature preference. Visit www.sleep.me/tabletalk to get your Chili Pad and save up to $315 with the code TABLETALK. This offer is available exclusively for Table Talk listeners and only for a limited time. Order today with free shipping and try it out for 30 days. So we'll jump back in. I'm going to change topics here. I'm going to go back to the training because how long have you had the gym now?
A little over 3 years.
So 3 years. So now you're around more lifters probably than you ever have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So you're dealing with beginners and you're dealing with intermediates. And so how are you taking with the lifters that you work with the template that you've had and then implementing that across the board to different skill sets?
Yeah. So basically, in the vast majority of cases, now it's going to change depending on goals. If you have somebody who's an absolute beginner and let's say their goals are just, to build some strength for general health and longevity, that's totally different than somebody who's looking to be a competitive power lifter. But if anybody's if their main goal is to get stronger, I'm going to start with that basic template. And then I'm tweaking all the assistance exercises and, and then in the program in a way that matches up best with their goals. If you look at a lot of my athletes, the programs are going to look similar, but they're not cookie cutter. And the accessories are going to address what that athlete needs. I'm looking at their weaknesses. I'm looking at their strengths. I'm looking at where they need to progress. And then it could be some things like the mental stuff. We're going to do, if they're having problems with heavy weights, we're going to start doing a lot more heavy reverse bands, or we're going to, do other things like that. And then, but there's a lot of commonalities and a lot of shared aspects. But yeah, it's, I start with, like I said, anybody who's looking to get stronger, we start the basic template, and then it's going to be, customized to their goals, their needs, and their level, like where they at. Like if somebody's, brand new to powerlifting and has a small lifting base, you throw them on a good progression, they're going to make some progress for a while. And then in some of it's too, it's like, how banged up are they? What do we got to, and then like I've got some clients now that all of a sudden my gym gear is starting to catch on. It's powerlifting gear, not gear. So the programs are totally different for somebody who's using benchers, squat suits, and deadlift suits. And so our assistance stuff is very much tailored to what they need to work on for those things. And like I said, I give it somebody who's, never touched a weight in their life or never done anything athletic. And I have some people like that. I'm starting out on a very basic full body program and, just progressing slowly. If somebody's never trained, you just put them on something that, number one, they can understand, they know what to do properly. You make sure I go through all their workouts with them at least once, make sure they understand what the good form is. And just start slow, and then they gradually work up. And then I give them a couple months there and they start to plateau out, or they start getting a little bored. Then we change some things up. But I don't take somebody who's never lifted before and have them doing incredibly complex movements right off the bat. That's a waste of time, and it's not necessary. And if anything, you're just going to frustrate them or possibly injure them. So it's just, it's all tailored to their level and what they're looking to achieve. And I try to stress with people too, look, sometimes people get, comparing themselves to everybody else in the gym. Look, that doesn't matter because actually it's an author, one saying I heard a few years back, or a book I was reading that really hit home for me was from the author Brene Brown. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but one thing she says is that comparison is a thief of joy. And it's so true, because comparison, you can always compare yourself to someone who's better at something than you are, or you perceive to be better. Even if you are, maybe it is somebody you're actually more proficient in something, but you don't see it that way in your mind. You steal all that. You're always going to find a way to be basically hating on yourself or finding a way to look negative. Well, I'm not as strong as so-and-so, or they're better at this lift or better at that lift. Don't do that. Focus on yourself. Just focus on getting better every time, every month to month, week to week. Do all the little things. Focus on improvement. Don't focus on comparison. Now, yeah, competition is comparison, and that's maybe where you check things. And for some people, that's very motivating. For somebody like me, that, winning was a huge thing. But if I focused in my training training and I was, like back when I was competing, if I was focused on beating Brian Carroll or Dondell Blue or Jeremy Frey, or whoever it was, that's fucking wrong. That is not the way to make good progress. And that's not the way to become successful. And I never did that. I didn't think about beating any specific person. I thought about getting stronger every fucking time. And I would be the one to beat, like make them beat me. And if I keep getting better, sooner or later, I'm going to pull away from all those guys. And that was my goal. And I try to stress out with my clients too, this lift isn't as good, or, this is somebody, usually with the guys, you'll get, so-and-so's benching more than me, or I just saw him hit a big squat yesterday. Well, if it motivates you, okay, good. But don't focus on that. Focus on what do we got to do to improve your squat. And like I said, everything's just going to be tailored. But and I tell people look, program's important, but consistency, effort, coming in here, working hard, giving 100%. And that doesn't mean screaming and yelling and going balls out every single day, but putting in the required work and being consistent with it. Those are the most important things. If you're in here working hard and you're consistent and you're not missing training, you're going to make progress. Now, granted, there's going to be plateaus, there's going to be setbacks, but over the long term, it's like the stock market. You're going to continue to go, there's going to be some peaks and some valleys, but in the long term, you're going to continue to get stronger. And it's putting in the work, putting in the time. And those things matter more. Like you said, like you mentioned earlier, if you look at all the champions, they're all doing different programs. Mm-hmm. There's not one perfect program out there. There's not one perfect coach that can lead everybody to, be the world champion. There's a lot of other qualities involved there, but it's hard work, it's effort, it's faith in yourself. And, it's all those other things that matter every bit as much as the program, if not more.
So once they get into your 4-week blocks,
mm-hmm.
What are the percentages of those blocks?
So typically, an average, like I said, it's going to vary a little bit, but typically I'm doing 2.5% increases from block to block. So I do a week of 5s, a week of 3s, a week of singles, and then a deload week. And then the deload week is sets of 10. And then except for deadlift on the deload week, we don't deadlift at all, just assistance movements. And then, and their starting percentages will be anywhere from 70 to 80 based on the lifter and their own. Cause some people are very, fast twitch and do very good with heavy weights. And then you have other clients that are much more endurance based. And you see this especially with the women. You'll have women that can do 10 reps really close to their max. And, you give the same guy, for example, 225 on bench. Most people, if they can bench 225 for 10, are going to be able to bench 300, but not everybody. You'll have some people who can do 225 for 7 and can already bench 300. You have some people who can do 225 for a dozen and still can't. So those percentages will be adjusted based on, how it suits them. But I'm usually starting somewhere between 70 and 80% at the beginning of the block. And then each wave, those core lifts are going up by 2.5% each wave. So we're making a 10% increase over, 7.5% increase over 16 weeks.
Yeah. Now, the second movement you said was more conjugate max effort.
Yeah, usually, like I said, there's going to be, there's going to be variation depending on the client, but typically, so for squats, a lot of times the second movement is going to be maybe reverse band squats with chains, maybe a safety squat bar type movement, maybe cambered bar, maybe a fly flew right in my mouth, and something like that. And then deadlifts, maybe it's deficit deads, maybe it's snatch grip deads, maybe it's a partial dead, maybe it's another movement that closely resembles that, or deads against bands, or even reverse bands with bench. Maybe it's board presses, maybe it's reverse bands, maybe it's sometimes I'll have some stronger guys start with 5 chains on each side and then just add bar weight going up until they reach a 5 rep max or whatever, floor presses, or
and that's going to be selected based upon their weak points.
Exactly, based on their strengths and weaknesses and what I feel they need to improve.
And the rep range?
Rep range is usually, I'd say it's usually between triples and 5s. Sometimes it goes higher. I don't usually take those movements too often to a single. Sometimes I do. If I do that, it'll be on the singles week, because I found if you train too long at above a 90% intensity, you're gonna slip backwards. Mm-hmm. And so usually it's going to be between 5s and triples, but sometimes we'll do them for singles during the singles week. But I'm not having them take true maxes. I'm having them stop at least 5 to 10 or a couple percent short of, but with some people, it's hard to figure that out too. So that's one thing too, for me, someone who grew up lifting and, trained with a lot of people who'd been lifting their whole lives, you take for granted like that people know these things and understand, like when I tell them, stop, 2 reps shy of failure or shy of failure. Some people understand that. Some people have no fucking clue. And that's like, I didn't, I have one kid, love him to death. He's in med school in Philly, great kid, works really hard. And I love his attitude, but he hasn't lifted long enough to have any concept of when he's close to failure. He can't judge that at all. He really struggles with that. So I try to program that for him. But yeah, I tell him, stop. He was just missing lifts all the fucking time. And I'm like, dude, what is going on? He's like, well, I think I can do it, and I'll watch, and he'll send me videos of all his lifts, and I'll see the set before that. And it was a grinder. And I'm like, what do you mean? You thought you had 20 pounds left? Like you barely got the last rep on the previous set. Stopping at the previous one, perfect. But his mindset is, well, I just need to push through it. I can push through it. I can get more. Well, not every day. So some people, that's a tricky thing because they don't understand like what 1 or 2 reps in reserve means, or RPE. Like a lot of people use RPE. I find RPE not to be of a lot of help. I tried using it for a while. What I think RPE is and what the client thinks RPE is, or what someone else, like some people think that, like for me, RPE was kind of, it was a representation of the amount of effort it was taking. So if I told somebody, I want to see an RPE 8, that means, 80% of failure, or like you're stopping a couple reps shy. Well, somebody else would be like, well, I feel great today. So 8 today is different than an 8 yesterday, and I can push it really hard. And then on a day they're tired or something, there was an excuse to totally slack off. Well, 8 today for me, I was really tired and I felt like shit. So RPE 8 meant I only went up to like 50%. And I'm like, bro, you just wasted that didn't do anything for you. You basically did a day of warm-ups. Yeah. And I found RPE to be very tricky to use, didn't really work well. And reps in reserve, people seem to understand better, but there's going to be some clients who they just have no concept. They don't know how close they are to failure, or, some people are stopping away. I have one client and I love it. She describes herself as very risk averse. And so she's like very paranoid about getting injured or missing lifts and stuff. And she tends to be overly cautious. And I know that. So then in her training, I program her, and the way I describe it, like her to do certain exercises, takes that into account. And the same thing with the kid that's overly aggressive. So I've got to pull him back and I've got to push her a little more. And so it's like, recognizing that in your clients and be able to coach them. And then some people too, it's like, you got some people that I've had clients that are just tough as hell, and you constantly got to make sure they're not hurting themselves or just overtraining because they're pushing 110% on every set of every exercise. And other ones are lazy as fuck. They'll only want to do the main movement. And it's funny because if they train at my gym, I'll have them do, if I'm not able to watch them in person, then I have them send me videos. But I also have the security cameras. And so like they won't be showing me like their assistance movements. So I'll pull up the security cameras and I'll be like, bro, you did the main movement, one other exercise, and then went home. You sat around and talked for 2 hours. You literally didn't even do half the workout. And and some people you can confront and have good conversations and like, okay, yeah, I'll step it up. And other people don't handle that well. Well, you don't understand. My elbow's killing me. My wrist. If I do this, I'm not gonna be able to train. Some people you're just not gonna be able to get 100% effort out of, and for as a coach, that's what frustrates me more than anything. And that's where I have a hard time. Like I had conversation with Swede a few years back about that. And like, he gets a lot of gratification from coaching and really, really enjoys it. And for me, I like it, but I'm more of an athlete. Like my mindset is where I want to be the one in the arena. And that's where, and it's hard for me as a coach to not impose my own mindset on my athletes and like not like expect them to put in the same kind of effort I would put in. And I've done a much better job about reining that back, but I would get really frustrated with some people. And it's not like I would jump them and chew them out. I'm not that type of person. Like I don't yell at my people or anything like that. But sometimes I'm like, well, if you're not going to put in the effort, then neither am I. I'm not going to waste a ton of time trying to program this perfectly for you when I know you're not even going to do it. Yeah. And, so that's been a hard thing as a coach, like realizing like, okay, not everybody wants to be a world champion. Not everybody has the mindset it's going to take to get there. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's just recognizing, people's values, people's goals, and what's rewarding for them. If they're just coming in and having fun every day, that's totally fine. But they also need to accept that. You can't go in there every day and talking about wanting to be a world champion and putting in effort that's not even going to get you to the state level. Yeah. Like, be realistic. Like it's fine if you don't want to be a world champ or you don't want to, you accomplish these things. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But be honest with yourself. Like if you're putting in a very mediocre effort, then be fine being a hobbyist or, make peace with it. Don't Don't make 50 million excuses under the sun that, your genetics or, this or that, or all the other stresses you have in life. Look, everybody's got stress. Everybody's got issues. Everybody's got injuries. Don't cop out and say, well, it's all these other factors and it's not me. Take responsibility for it.
Well, that's a hard thing with RPE and even RIR to a degree is because you have to anchor that somehow. So what you think it is and what the client thinks it is has to be really close to the same. And your expectation is going to be based upon what you've done in your history, and theirs is based upon what they've done in their history. And maybe what they are doing is the hardest they've ever worked in their life. Yeah. But you can look at it and say, not really. There's way more adversity to be there. And that creates this issue, if you're just broadly prescribing these things out without seeing them or really good communication to be able to know what it is, because over a period of time, that effort, for lack of a better word, has to increase, for them to be able to get better. And they may think that what they're doing is okay. The first thing that went through my mind when you were talking about the guy's wrist hurts or whatever it's going to be is you can't do like rope push down. There's always something you can do. Yeah. No matter how fucked up something is, there's an alternative there. As you work through the training day though, and after you get through, say, the first two movements and you start going kind of into like bodybuilding mode. Yeah. So when you get into that mode even with your own training, because you have a bodybuilding background as well. So before the bodybuilding background, it's, croc rows and shit like that, just heavy muscle fucking shit, however you can do that. Yeah. Then when you went through your bodybuilding phase, did some of that dissipate to become more training the muscle than the movement?
Yeah, in some ways. There was some of that was kept in and some of it evolved. And it definitely became more important, like with the hypertrophy training, more, volume rep wise and set wise, pumping a lot of blood into the muscles, things like that, and making sure you're working. Because I had been training my whole life, I did have a good mind muscle connection. Like people talk about, like I could always feel the muscles working. Like I was somebody, I knew when my lats were engaged and when they weren't, so that was kind of an advantage for me. But it was, okay, I'm not focused, like strength isn't the primary goal here. And like for me, I had, like when I transitioned from powerlifting and bodybuilding, I had a thick torso. Like I had a thick chest, I had a thick back, and I had decent sized legs, but my shoulders and arms were really undersized for bodybuilding. And I was able to put, I think it was 2.5 inches on my arms over like a 2-year period. I still remember the one time I came here for one of the seminars and Wendler was here. And I think it was when I was first getting close to like 270, and I'd made really good gains that year and he hadn't seen me in a minute. And I walked in and he was like, Jesus Christ. He's like, do you do anything but train? But it was like, I learned how to change things to cause the hypertrophy and really put some size on. Of course, it was diet and a lot of other things too. But yeah, it definitely, and if I got a client who's a bodybuilder, their stuff's going to look a lot different than somebody who's a power lifter. But I still feel for most people, like core basic compound movements are going to be the best ways to, gain size. And you get stronger, you get bigger. It's not a direct ratio. And then just because one person can bench more than another doesn't mean they're going to have a bigger chest. But if that person benches 300 and they bench 400, they're going to have a bigger chest when they bench 400 than they did when they bench 300. So there is some correlation, but it's not a 1-to-1, and it's not just make them stronger and they're going to be bigger for bodybuilding. Plus the injury risk and stuff doesn't warrant it. And but I do think people cop out. You hear in bodybuilding all the time, oh, the bench press is useless. And but here's the thing: look at the physiques nowadays. Look at the physiques from back in the 70s and 80s. They've gotten bigger in every way, but especially the arms and legs. Arms and legs are way bigger than they were in the past. But you know what's smaller is the chest. Look at everybody's chest. You don't see anybody. The last time people had big chests was like Johnny Jackson, Branch Warren, Ronnie Coleman, guys in the 80s like Bertil Fox. Arnold had a big chest. What did they all do that nobody does now? Bench. They all bench. Kevin Levrone benched. They are all big, strong guys. Marcus Rule did a ton of benching. And then the guys now, they all have these paper thin pecs. Well, I shouldn't say paper thin. That's an exaggeration. But the pecs are not proportional to the rest of their physique. And you hardly see anyone that has, like in the past, like everybody had big, thick chests and they were all benching. And now nobody benches because, oh, you're going to tear your pecs off. You're going to have a career-ending injury. And that's like this, thing. And not that there isn't a potential for injury, not that it's totally safe, but also, what Louis say? One thing, something that's totally safe is also totally worthless. Mm-hmm. And, But I think, so things like that. But yeah, a lot of it's, picking those accessory movements, based on their weaknesses, based on their goals and, what their needs are at the time. And that's going to vary obviously from every, in every client.
Did that change at all after your bodybuilding career on how you viewed the accessory movements?
Yeah, I did. I'll tell you what, I learned a lot from Meadows. I learned a lot from John. Worked with him for a while. I worked with a couple different people. John was the only one I ever let take over my training. I worked with diet on several different people, but and then I found unfortunately too, I learned some things that didn't work. One mistake we made was going away from a lot of the really heavy training that I was doing for somebody like me that had built all their size on heavy training, excluding some of that. And I'm sure he felt the training he was giving me was really heavy. And that probably was for somebody who came up with a bodybuilding background, but it wasn't heavy enough for me. And I lost some thickness and lost some size in some of my major muscle groups, but I learned a lot from him. I picked up a lot of new exercises. I picked up a lot of new techniques that I still incorporate to this day. So it was good to see someone else's, that was very knowledgeable, had a lot of experience, their whole training philosophy, how that differed. And I picked up a lot of things I really liked from him. So I learned a lot.
What are some of the techniques you still use now?
Just lots of exercises I'd never seen before. Back then, now everybody knows, what a Meadows row is, or things like his partial laterals. We did, I had never seen a spider curl. What were some of the other things, like twist presses on bench? There are lots of assistance movements that I just never seen, from the bodybuilding world. And he just had some, unique techniques and unique ways of programming things. But yeah, so it was good and just working with him and picking his brain and us discussing things. And that's what I tell people too. One of the most things I was fortunate and that contributed a lot to my success was being part of Elite FTS, and being here, we'd come and, do these big train sessions and we all openly shared our ideas and our critiques and tell each other well, hey, this is what's working for me. This is what I do. You watch somebody bench and be like, hey dude, try this or try that. And it was literally getting all the top people in the world together in one room and then openly sharing ideas. And I learned so much, we had so many smart guys. And, but yeah, and it was just I'd help somebody and they'd help me. And then I loved the seminars, and not just for speaking at them, but just being able to be in attendance and get to hear everybody and hear all their philosophies and theories and different stuff. And then a lot of times I'd walk away and be like, holy shit, I never thought of it from that way, and so it was, I walked away from every single one learning something.
With nutrition, it's always been on point, but how did that change over the years of competing?
Well, obviously with making the move to bodybuilding, then it became much more about reducing body fat. And then in the off season, I was never somebody who did dirty bulks and stuff like that. And I found it to be counterproductive. If you got really heavy and put on a ton of fat, by the time you diet it all away, now you've stripped away a bunch of the muscle you gained at the same time. It's a really difficult thing to do. And for me, that was one thing one thing I never did figure out, and I didn't compete long enough or never got really good at, was dieting down and getting low, in low single digits and being able to maintain all the size that I had. And that was one thing with Justin Harris, Justin really well, and him and I are good friends. And Justin's if you ever do another show, I really want to do your diet, because he's I really think you could have came in way bigger than you did, that you never were able to maintain the muscle you should have been able to. And but yeah, so I always, maybe with some over dieting, and I seem to be require more carbs than a lot of people that dieted down. Stripping out my carbs, I would burn up a lot of size. And I think sometimes I was doing too much cardio and things that really thin my legs out and stuff like that. But everybody's different. I mean, I've seen some people grow into shows, and which always blew my mind. I'm like, how the fuck does that work? And that was something I was never able to do. For me, it was just trying to minimize, the muscle loss while getting as lean as I needed to be. Unfortunately, I usually wasn't starting from a bad place. I mean, you remember me, I never got fat. And, but I did get, I think in my biggest, I think I hit 280, and I was pretty thick, but I would start my diet, usually around 270, and I was getting on stage at 225, and I didn't have 50 pounds of fat to lose for sure. Justin was very confident that I should have been stepping on stage in the 240s and close to 250, but I was never able to. That was one thing I was never able to figure out. But yeah, so the diet was very much adjusted to that, and but it's nothing a lot of the diet. It's a similar thing. It's sticking to the basics, tweaking it, figuring out like sometimes there's certain foods that your body just responds better to. And, sometimes maybe that's digestion, maybe it's just, gains. It's like, maybe it's absorption or whatever. But like some people really do really well on steak and rice, and other ones, it really upsets their stomach or whatever. They have a hard time processing it. And some of it's, so someone's playing with that. Like, some diets I did a ton of fish, and other ones I did a ton of turkey or whatever. And I just found out what worked best for me. But a lot of it, it's basic math at the end of the day, calories in, calories out. But some people do better with more carbs in the diet. Some people do better on a keto diet or very, very low carb. And some of that's trial and error, figuring out what works for you. And I find a lot of it does seem to be determined by, like, I've noticed, and this is almost across the board with a lot of my clients, and I think it's a very interesting thing, and I haven't heard many people talk about it, but I've noticed people that were very heavy in their youth tend to be much more carb sensitive, and also tend to be much higher converters of test to estrogen, have a lot of aromatase enzyme. If somebody who was very lean growing up tend to require more carbs, and this isn't like 100% across the board, but I've definitely noticed significant trends, and also tend to be very low converters of testosterone to estrogen. And that's how I was myself. I was a skinny kid, and I could take, all the tests under the sun, and my estrogen levels never raised. And, but then I've had clients who were like, became one of my good friends, and one of my clients, he was a kid who was a 300-pound lineman in high school and was really heavy growing up. And then around, by the time he got 30, he dieted down to like 220 and got super lean. But you put him on a little bit of test, and his estrogen levels go through the roof. His amount of aromatase is ridiculous. Like, he just converts like crazy. And I've noticed that across the board. Whenever I had athletes, their estrogen levels were really spiking. First thing I asked him was like, "Were you a heavy kid?" And every single time, yep. And then other people, like I said, could never had issues with estrogen, and almost every single time, I've always been lean. And like I said, it's not an absolute, but it's a definite trend that I've seen in a lot of athletes.
So with your lifters, where do you start them with their diet?
Well, the first thing I do is have them keep a week log and turn it into me. And I'm like, look, don't bullshit me. Mm-hmm. Be honest. If you ate a fucking bag of Doritos last night, tell me. I can't help you if you're not being honest. And I know people have a tendency, they want you to show you like a perfect diet, and like, no, because it's not perfect, or you'd look perfect, and or at least a lot better than you do right now. But like, you need to be honest. But the first thing I do is log everything they've been eating, as close as they can. And there's so many good apps nowadays too that make it really easy. And use one of those, track all your stuff, give it for a week, then give me that, and let me see where you're at. We need to figure out where your maintenance calories are. I want to see like how many carbs you're eating a day, how much protein. A lot of people, the common trends you see, they undereat protein, overeat carbs and fat. Unless there's somebody who's very obsessive about their diet, then you get people who maybe they're taking in twice as much protein as they actually need, barely taking in any carbs. Or like, especially with the women, sometimes you'll see like over dieting, and those are the toughest clients. The toughest client is a woman who's dieted herself into a corner, who's eating like 800 calories a day and isn't anywhere near as lean as she wants to be. Then you're going to have to go through a phase where you build her metabolism back up and recover all that stuff. And you got to explain to them like, look, you're going to gain some weight initially, but trust me, in the end, it's going to work out. And it's a lot of work and it takes a lot of discipline. I think for most people, diet is harder than training. It's the consistency. And even that even goes for myself too. Yeah. Like, I had no problem sticking to a diet for a bodybuilding show. It was fucking miserable. And it's like everybody's first show is the worst. It's like anytime it's like, and I have a guy right now, you're talking about like people like their RPE 10 is different than what I think RPE 10 is. And it's the same thing with like dieting for the first time. When you diet for the first time, like that first, like you feel like shit and you're like 6 weeks out and you're like, how much worse is this going to get? Like, I have no energy. All I think about is food all the time. But then once you've been through it once, every time it gets a little easier, because now you know how bad it's going to be, and you know where you're going to get to. And it's the same thing with training. Like, I got a guy right now, and I'm sure he'll listen to this podcast. He'll probably get a chuckle out of this, but like, he is just, so he's, he did a powerlifting meet in June. He's been training with me for almost a year. He's made a lot of progress, had an awesome meet, went 9 for 9, PRs across the board, did really, really well. He's put in a lot of work, but he's never been pushed to his limits before. And like now he wants to lean up some, but also, and then, we want to add some muscle mass. And so we're doing more hypertrophy training. His joints are pretty beat up and stuff. He's in his 40s. And, so he's getting a little banged up, and that's also something he's not used to. He's not used to being banged up all the time. And so initially you tend to think like, oh man, I can't do this. I can't do that. And it's like, look, we'll figure out ways to train around it. Like right now, like he's got a lot of wrist pain, and he screwed up something in ligament in his wrist. And so I'm doing lots of presses with the football bar and stuff. The neutral hand position helps a lot. So we got to figure out how to train around it. And then, so I put him through some really, like, we're doing some hypertrophy training, some bodybuilding stuff. And I knew mentally, like, he had never been pushed to those places. So part of the reason to do this too is to increase not only his work capacity, but also his mental capacity. Like, push him outside his comfort zone, push him to places he's never been, and let him realize. And that's one thing the Marine Corps did for me, was I took my body to places it had never been before and realized, fuck, I got a lot more left than what I thought I did. And that's what I'm doing with him right now. And it's like putting him through some of these leg workouts, and you can see in his face, he's dying. And like, he thinks that, like, I can't do this, like having him do a bunch of drop sets and a bunch of volume work and stuff he's just never done. And he's literally, like, we got to the end of it and I had him doing split squats, and he's like falling down and like, but in my mind, I've, been through this myself. I've seen other people do it. I know he's got more left, but his brain's telling him, dude, you're done. Like, that's all, because he's never been to these places before. But every time we do this, it's going to get easier for him. And now he's going to understand, he's going to be able to push himself harder in the future and realize, oh, there was more in my gas tank than I thought there was. And my body can take more than I thought it could. But right now he's like, fucking like dying. Like,
I mean, in a way though, what you're doing with that is you're anchoring effort, where, intensity I see as a percentage of a 1 rep max. It's pretty easy to anchor that, but the effort's hard to anchor. And so by pushing somebody like that, optimally, they don't need to train that way to progress. Right.
100%. Yeah.
But if that's the 10, then they need to train it at 8. But if his 10 was a 6 before, and now you just exposed, here's what a 10 is, then them training at that 8 is going to be 2 points higher than what they've done before across the board. Where your bench example earlier as well is, the stronger somebody gets on the compounds, the stronger they're going to be able to get on side raises and everything else across the board. So side raises with 10 pounds versus side raises with 35, 40 pounds is a different stimulus than if it always stayed 10, 15, 20, so getting stronger, even for hypertrophy, matters, right? Because the weight you're going to use on all those other things is going to end up being different because of that. With that anchoring of the effort with this person, at what point will that start to peel back? Because I get what you're doing.
Yeah, right? It's a temporary thing. It's a temporary thing, but and also he was having trouble like getting through like some of the workouts, like really dying towards the end. So some of it's to build his work capacity, but mental capacity more than anything. But yeah, I'll take him through a couple cycles of this, and we'll see how he responds. And he's just done like the first 4-week block. We're just starting the second 4-week block, and I'll do something similar probably through this block, probably scale it back on the next one. I'm going to see how he responds, how he feels, and then how he's pushing himself this time. And I expect everything to be better across the board. And then we'll start to scale things back.
Well, the work capacity becomes an interesting conversation too, right? Because accessories for a lot of people have become meaningless. They just don't do those at all. And so their total work capacity. So it's interesting how this happens, because how it typically follows is either by injury or time commitments, people just start peeling back what they're doing in their training, and then they see a spike in their strength. Kind of like what you do before you peak for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Then they think, oh, this shit's all unnecessary, but they don't realize what they did was to indirectly peak, for that. But then over a period of time, it starts falling and falling because their work capacity falls, and their ability to recover falls, their ability to make it through a meet falls. And the work capacity is something that gets lost in the conversation of effective reps. Right? Because and what the effective number of sets per week are for hypertrophy and all the other science stuff. And I don't disagree with any of that. It all has its place, but they're missing the aspect of there's still work capacity that has to be developed here to be able to recover. Now, on the opposite end of that would be, Louis, that thought it was just an endless thing that just keep increasing forever, but when you look at what the end point of that could possibly be, look at how often CrossFitters train and what effort they train at pretty much all day long. So work capacity it's definitely a spectrum that's large.
For sure.
And for a lot in powerlifting, it's digressed. instead of being where it needs to be. Have you found the same thing?
Yeah, 100%. And you bring up a really good point. And I see this with a lot of young lifters where you probably noticed as well, there's a real popular trend in a lot of the young, especially drug-free kids, to bench, squat, and deadlift like 4 times a week, 3 times a week, but they're doing almost no assisted movements. All they're doing is the main 3 lifts. And they'll have, one of those days during the week will be a heavy day for each of the lifts. And there'll be like lighter, moderate days for the, like say you have, say Monday is a day you're heavy on bench, and then you have, moderate squats and deadlifts, and then, Wednesday or whatever. But like, throughout the week, they might be often they're benching 4 times a week, squatting and deadlifting 3 times a week. And then one of those days is like a heavy day, but they do almost no assistance work. And I've seen a lot of these young kids come in the gym. And what I've noticed across the board is, they're young and they're drug free, but they're not that strong and they don't have any muscle mass and they're not getting bigger and they're not making a lot of progress, most of them. And I'm not going to say this doesn't work for anybody because there's some good athletes that use it and it works for them. But I think speaking in general, I don't see it to be the most effective way to train. And the problem is, number one, when you're doing the same compound movements 3 to 4 times a week, your same movement patterns, you're beating up all those joints. You got these young kids that are, in their early 20s or late teens, and their elbows, shoulders, and everything are already killing them. And they're not moving that heavy of weights, it's like you shouldn't be that beat up, but you're just doing the same movement patterns over and over and over again. But you're doing no hypertrophy work. You have no muscle mass. Like half these kids, if you saw them outside the gym, you wouldn't even know they lift. And so that's the 2 of the big problems I see with that style of training is that you're beating up your body unnecessarily and you're not doing anything to add more muscle mass. And you're only going to go so far being 148 pounds or 165 or whatever it is. That needs to be part of your training as well. So that style of training, like I said, I'm not going to say. Do
you see with those lifters, their attrition rate's higher?
Yeah, they kind of seem to be. I do because like nothing. How many people are going to stick around for a long time if you're not making a lot of progress? Mm-hmm. If you're beat up and hurt and you're not progressing, it's not very fun. Yeah. And so it becomes more of, I think they start out with big aspirations, and then when things aren't happening, they get frustrated, and they disappear. They start getting into other things, or just I had too many injuries, I'm done. But if they were making progress and enjoying it, they'd be sticking around a lot longer. But yeah, you see a higher attrition rate and but it's very interesting culture, right? Like the internet and social media has changed things so much. There's so much influence, and it's funny. Like you see all these young kids gravitating towards the same stuff, and it's because that's what they're seeing every day. That's what they're seeing on TikTok. That's what they're seeing on Instagram, and so that exposure has, I feel like it's a blessing and a curse because there's so much information sharing, which is awesome. But the problem is with the way the algorithms work and stuff, it's like whatever you're into, it's feeding you more of the same. And so it's an echo chamber, and all you're hearing is all the same stuff, and you're not hearing all the other aspects and all the other perspectives. And so it can be very limiting. In addition, even though there's all that knowledge out there, it shocks me. Like the thing that will baffle me to the end of my days is the accounts and people that are very, very popular that have really nothing valuable to contribute, and the people that are extremely knowledgeable and very accomplished, and nobody pays attention to them. It's really, it boils down to if you're good at marketing yourself or not. Mm-hmm. But you got some really, really popular, influencers out there that don't understand shit and have never done anything themselves, have accomplished zero and know zero, but everybody listens to them. And then you have some really, really smart people, accomplished people that barely anybody pays attention to. And to me, it's so frustrating. But the problem is, if you're up and coming, you don't know the difference. Well, this guy's got 5 million followers. He must know what he's doing. But, a lot of times they don't. And,
it's, the biggest limitation I see there is everything's clipped, right? Yeah. So if you're looking at a squat, you don't see how the bar was approached. You don't see how it was set up. A lot of times if they're walking out, you don't even see the walkout. Yeah. So you're just seeing that lift. That's it. You're not seeing accessories. You're not seeing anything outside of that, which is such a small fraction of what happens in a training day.
Yeah.
Right. So if the training session is an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, you're seeing literally 8 seconds of the 2 hours.
Yeah.
Where, you know, some of Louis' first videos, and I never understood it, but it makes sense now. He filmed the whole entire training session from start to finish. So you see what everybody's doing between sets, what they're doing, how soon they start to get ready before the lift, all this stuff. It's boring as fuck if you're a lifter, right? Because like, oh God, you're fast forwarding just to see, right? Just see the main thing, which is all that's being seen now. But if you're training in a gym with other people, you see all this. Yeah. You know, see, are they sitting between sets? Are they standing? Are they spotting? Are they not spotting? All this stuff gets picked up when you're in that environment where it's not being exposed and they're not seeing that. Yeah. So
that's a good point. That's one thing. Like we'd come here for these training sessions and stuff. And it's just like looking at like the lifters I see in my gym or, you know, other places, and then seeing the kind of environment we had here or that I had in my basement with my, you know, 5 or 6 consistent training partners. It's very, very different. But again, you know, then I guess, you know, maybe I'm comparing the elite to, you know, your average people. But it's a very different environment, right? And it's just like the way like the guys here approach their sets and approach their training. Yeah, did we bullshit in between sets? Sure. Sometimes we maybe take a little too long, sure. But when it was time to go to work, we went to fucking work. And it's just like I see too many people like when I'm watching the workout from the outside, I'm like, dude, you just did 2 hours of warm-ups. I never saw one set in there that you really put some effort in, or they're trying to kill themselves on everything and not like don't have any concept of how to regulate that stuff. Yeah, it's definitely, but that's a very good point in that. And the other thing too, problem with social media, right? It's a highlight reel. I mean, some people will share like, you know, all their training or, you know, their failures as well. But 99% of the time, what is it? It's all your PRs, all your best lifts, part of a set. Like they don't show you when they failed at the end or, you know, other stuff too. It's a highlight reel. So it's not an accurate representation of both the success they're having or the failure they're having and the, you know, the whole process. There's just so much that's missing from that. And I think that's where the current crop of up and coming lifters has it the hardest, is that there's not like a realistic expectation there. And then also that they're missing a lot of the learning process, right? Like back in the day, none of us had coaches. We were our own coaches. Our team was our coach and we shared amongst each other and bounced stuff off each other, but you had to figure things out. And that was so beneficial later on because you understood everything so much better, where now people aren't even trying to understand. They're just like, okay, get me a new coach. And then when after a couple meets, and if they have one bad meet, well, who's your coach? You did good last time. Who's your coach? I'm gonna go to him. And then they're just jumping around and they have no concept and no understanding of what creates progress and what doesn't. And their body, like, yeah, you're changing everything. So how do you know what worked?
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy to me because if it's a good coach and it didn't go well, then they learned what doesn't work.
Yeah. They just got
why
some
start
more
over,
feedback.
you know,
Yeah.
so it just can be stacked upon, you know, where the odds of just stumbling across something that's better is going to be way less because it's still personal accountability, you know, that it comes down to. And powerlifting's always been weird for that because none of us missed a weight because we actually weren't strong enough, right? There's always a million other reasons for that. So that hasn't really changed, but in our minds at the end of the day, it's still personal accountability. Like I didn't do this, and this, or I shouldn't have done this, you know, to kind of play it all out. With your injuries, how did you know when to train through or around something?
That was something like, so I was somebody who was naturally like, well, environment and genetics, right? Like my natural instincts were to push through things. And then the way I grew up, you know, I was an 8-year-old kid splitting firewood in the backyard with a 8-pound maul in the cold with, you know, terry cloth gloves and blue jeans on. So I was used to being uncomfortable and I was used to doing those things. So my natural instincts were to push through everything. And, you know, and on the plus side, that helped me get through injuries. That helped me overcome a lot of things. It gave me a good work ethic. On the bad side was there was no off switch. You know, I didn't pull back. And so I learned the hard way, like through injuries but a lot of it was just trial and error. Like a lot of it, like, you know, yeah, that fucking hurts. If I do more of that, now I just made it worse. And then I realized like, well, okay, if I can't bench this way, what if I do this? What if I do a different exercise that's very similar? What if I change my grip? What if I back the weights off a little bit? Maybe I just can't go that heavy right now. And it was a lot of trial and error and learning. And some of it was intuitive. And like, lucky for me, having been a lifelong athlete and started training at a very young age, I had a very good connection with my body. So much more than most people, right? Like, so I knew like, okay, this doesn't feel good. This does. I can do this. I can't do that. And like people are just getting into training as adults. They're not going to know those things. They're not going to know the difference between pain they can push through and pain they need to, give it time. A lot of it's just, a learning process. But again, if you have good coaches or you have experienced people around you, pick their brains and be like, hey, I feel this or I feel that. And I think what most people tend to err on the side of their first instinct, especially if they've never been if they weren't lifelong athletes, their first instinct is I can't do that. My shoulder hurts. I got to quit until my shoulder doesn't hurt anymore. Well, unfortunately, if you do that, you're never going to make progress because you're training less than you are training. But yeah, it's just like I said, like again, it's knowing your athletes sometimes too, and knowing who you got to pull the reins back on and who needs a little bit of a shove. But it's just, it's listening to your body, seeing what happens. Like, okay, if I can't do this, what can I do that's most similar? What can I do that, like I said, like with my guy with the wrist issue, he's able to press on a football bar without pain. So, okay, great. That's what we're going to do until that's cleared up. Sometimes it's like you got a shoulder issue. Okay, we're going to be using safety squat bar for a few weeks, or we're going to use a cambered bar or whatever, or a Duffalo bar. But then the thing too, it's part of it too, don't ignore what caused it in the first place. I mean, sometimes some things are just going to happen, but if you have terrible shoulder mobility and then your shoulder is constantly bothering you from heavy squatting, maybe you should improve your shoulder mobility and that shit will stop happening. And there's just so many people that are so resistant to that. Like, all they want to do is lift heavy. They don't want to do the little bullshit, but the little bullshit matters, keeps you healthy and lets you get stronger. But it's sometimes too, check in the ego, be honest with yourself, like, hey, okay, like with me and my jiu-jitsu, fucking ignored my bottom game for a couple of years. And guess what happens? I get put on bottom. I got my ass kicked. So now I had to be like, no, you know what? I need to go where it's uncomfortable. I need to do the things that I need to do. That's going to bring up that part of my game. That's going to make me, way better in the future. And the same thing with training. If you've got an area, a lot of times people don't want to work on the lift they're bad at, right? If you suck at deadlift or you suck at bench, like, well, I got a good squat and I got a good deadlift. Bench is what it is. No, you need to put the time in, make that stronger. Now your total is going to be that much better. Yeah, maybe you're never going to be a world champion bencher, but it'll get a hell of a lot better than it was. And so a lot of times it's just, checking your ego, doing the things you don't want to do. A lot of times that is a value in having a coach, because if you do, like most people, their tendency is going to be to not do the things they don't like doing. And even if you have a coach, sometimes ignoring those, being like, oh, I don't like that exercise, blah, 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 and make up an excuse. When really it's like, that one's fucking hard, it makes me uncomfortable and I don't like doing it. But so oftentimes that's the exercise you really need to do that's actually going to help you.
Do you feel for yourself, the adversity drove you? And this follow-up question to that would be, did you create adversity just to have something to drive through?
Yeah, that's some good psychology there, right? In some ways, yeah, like it does. Like adversity does motivate you. Sometimes improve. Like I have a thing I'm taped on my refrigerator right now at home, and my buddies were giving me shit about it not too long ago. But it says, it just in big letters, I've taped it outside the refrigerator, prove them wrong. And for me, it's just like when some words were said, and I know people like doubted my ability to do certain things. And I file that away. And so like every time I grab something out of the refrigerator, every time I'm in the kitchen, prove I'm fucking wrong. So like sometimes maybe if I'm, feel like slacking off a little bit or not doing the things I know I need to do, that's a reminder to like, hey, what motivates me to do this? Why do I want to do this? And it's just, checking my ego and working on the things I need to work on. And it's, every day is not going to be great. Every day is not going to be perfect. And to keep pushing on the days that are hard. Like jiu-jitsu is funny that way. You'll go in one day, like I'll go in training and everything's fucking clicking. And I'm like, doing really well against people that usually give me a good challenge, and I'm passing their guard and submitting them. And I'm like, fuck yeah, this stuff's clicking and I'm really making progress. I'm getting good. And then I'll go in the next day and I'm like getting my guard passed by somebody who normally I beat the shit out of. And it's like, what the fuck is happening? I feel like I don't know a damn thing, Mm-hmm. And, but when you're trying new techniques and new stuff, I mean, that's part of the process. But yeah, it's just, keeping your head down, keep pushing, keep grinding. And the adversity, is going to happen. It's going to come. Injuries are going to be there. Like my knee, it's frustrating. I want to be competing and it's killing me that I can't be out there, but I know it's a matter of time before I will be, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to be better than ever. And, but yeah, as far as creating adversity for myself, maybe a little bit sometimes, like doing things that hurt and, putting myself in uncomfortable situations. Like sometimes, you wonder, like, I got a screw loose or what drives this? And we all have, and insecurities are big drivers. And insecurities can be terrible things. They can drive people to very self-destructive behaviors. And my brother right now is struggling really bad with alcoholism. And it's a really strange process to watch, especially after my dad was an alcoholic and we went through all that. My brother had so much resentment towards him for it. My brother's worse than he ever was. And I really believe, personally, I believe a lot of his insecurities are driving the root cause, issues he doesn't want to face, or maybe he isn't even fully aware of. But then insecurities can also be used to be really good motivators. You just need to look at them from the proper perspective and recognize that. Like, I know I have chips on my shoulders from the way I grew up and being trans. Like, those are things that are always in the back of my mind. So I need to recognize that. I need to know it's there. And maybe it's not something that I'm not ever going to get rid of, but recognize that's a passenger and that's influencing my decisions. Now, how do I manipulate that to have a positive outcome versus allowing that to drive it to a negative outcome? I'm not somebody who ever turned to drugs or alcohol, but for a lot of people, that's what happens. Like, you feel like shit about something and you don't want to talk about it. You're afraid to talk about it. So fuck it. I'm going to have some beers and then I'm not going to think about it. And then, that's obviously a very negative outlet. And then for me, it was like, well, if I feel this way, like my thing was, for me, a lot of it was like being looked down upon and being seen as less than everybody else. And how much of that was actually true and how much of it was self-perception. It was a combination of the two. But my thing was, well, if I get better at this, if I can beat someone, they can't look down on me if I'm better than them. So when I was a kid, if it was doing better in school, if it was beating them at sports, if it was beating them in a fist fight, whatever it was, if I'm better, then in my mind, they couldn't look down on me. So it motivated me to work harder. It motivated me to achieve more, which was a positive outcome. And there are limits to that too. Like, you can drive yourself crazy, like, trying to, be the best at every single thing. And it was interesting. I talked to a girl I grew up with and went to school with, but was never really friends with. We never really talked, but I was in a small enough school where everybody knew everybody. And she had reached out to me on Facebook a number of years ago. And then she said when she was on there, she'd sent me a message and said that her daughter had asked her, like, who's that person? And she's like, oh, that's someone I went to school with. She described me as that was the person that had to be the best at everything. And that's how she remembered me. Like, I was the person that wanted to win at every single thing I did. And, but that's how I gained self-esteem. That's how I gained self-worth. And I try to be very conscious of that now. It's not a good thing to have all your self-worth wrapped up in all your successes. And then, so if you're not having success, you don't feel good about yourself. And I've definitely struggled with self-esteem. For even somebody like me, I've had a very, unique life and been fortunate enough to accomplish a lot of things. But there's still a lot of days where I didn't like who I was and still struggled with it. And to this day, like, I struggle a lot with my physical appearance, like, because of being trans and stuff. Like, I have a very hard time seeing myself as anything other than ugly and stuff like that. Like, I really struggle. I have a lot of self-image issues, body dysmorphia and things like that, but I'm conscious of it. I'm aware of it and I deal with those things and I'm working on that to make that better. And, but yeah, I mean, we all have things, we all have issues, we all have bullshit, but being aware of it and checking your ego and allowing yourself to deal with it and not turning to negative, things are gonna have a negative outcome, not turning to drugs or alcohol and, actually dealing with shit. And it's not easy. It's not easy to do,
Well, there's a certain, I've always said you can tell a meathead just through their eyes, like a true meathead. It's when I used to work as a personal trainer, a lot of my clients were gay, right? So they one time they explained to me what gaydar was, right? And I'm like, because I'm curious, like how do you fucking, like, how do you know? Yeah, right. And then when this guy explained this to me, I'm like, I think like meatheads have that. Like, you can just see like there's something fucked up, but they can use that, and it's to deal with all the other shit or whatever it's being used for. It becomes, a part of their identity if it's the competing or just the training really fucking hard, right? But as you get older, you can't do that the way that you used to before, right? Yeah. Which we've seen with a lot of other lifters becomes this identity crisis and all this other stuff. So, but it's still there. Like, it never goes away. Like, that desire to want to strain really fucking hard or whatever. Yep. It's always there. How have you navigated that? Because you have that, right? But then you also have, the gender thing that's playing into all that with the hormones as well. Yeah. So how have you navigated that? Because I know you, right? That you're gonna, I don't think BJJ is going to fill that, right? Yeah. It will fill it in different ways, but not the same way
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. And I think I'm finally getting to a place where I'm finding really good balance and, making peace with that. Excuse me. But it's a constant balancing process, right? Like for me, the biggest struggle's been balancing. There's two big parts of my identity, right? That I've had my whole life since I was a little kid. The athlete who's always wanted to be number one and only, knows how to operate in extremes. And then the gender issues, the gender identity that from the time I was 4 or 5 years old, always felt like I was supposed to be a girl. And like, how the fuck, do you balance those two?
Aren't they fighting each other?
Yeah, well, in reality, they shouldn't have to, but they do because of societal expectations, gender roles, what is deemed okay for men versus what's okay for women. Like I know a lot of women in the strength world that struggle with, they love being big, strong, and muscular, but there's so much negative pushback, right? Like that, their family, their friends, people don't understand that, oh, you look like a man, and it's a constant thing, right? And so many women deal with that. And then for me, and it affected my career. Like, honestly, if I wasn't trans, I would have had a much longer powerlifting career, probably hit much bigger lifts. But you'll remember the first time I told you was in 2007 after the one meet, and I thought I was going to transition then. So from that point on, I competed for another 8 years. I was a constant back and forth. And there was one year I did poorly at nationals in bodybuilding because I had gone completely off everything, dropped like 50 pounds, then changed my mind, tried to put all the muscle and everything back on, gone back on gear. And it really affected my earlier career because I got to a point in my life where I have to deal with this and I need to find some balance. And, transition weighed so heavy on me, but I wasn't ready to be done as an athlete either. So it was like, how do I balance my needs as an athlete with my needs to feel comfortable in my own skin? And it's like, one day, like, I dropped a bunch of weight, and like right now I've dropped 40 pounds in the last, couple months. And, I'm moving forward with transition and my needs in that arena. And I feel like I finally made peace with, sacrificing, a certain amount of my ability as an athlete, because it's just a cost. Unfortunately, the things I need are at opposite ends of the spectrum. And for me, number one, for me to look more feminine and to allow my body to change, allow more breast development and a different body fat distribution, I need to be off all gear, all male hormones. I've had an orchiectomy, which, so for people who don't know what that is, removal of the testes, and I lost one through cancer and then had the other one removed as part of my transition. So my body barely produces any testosterone at all. Like if you look at my blood work, my test levels are usually between like 5 and 12, and that's total. Like there's nothing. So obviously that's going to have an effect on my performance. So if I'm not adding in anything extra at all, my performance is going to drop off. I'm going to lose a lot of muscle. It's going to be more difficult to stay lean. I've been on estrogen. I've been on an estrogen implant for over 3 years now. I've been on progesterone for almost a year, and that's to help with breast development. And those aren't PEDs, they don't help, and they encourage more body fat. And
how does it impact your mind?
For me, I'm pretty lucky. Like as far as I always tell people with androgens, they don't create anything that wasn't there, but they're going to turn the volume up on everything. If you're someone who struggles with a lot of anxiety, or especially if you have issues with your temper, it's going to make it fucking worse. Luckily for me, I never had issues like that. Like I'm a person who's naturally tends to be, and my baseline is happy, and I tend to be an optimist, and I'm pretty calm. Like, yes, there are times where the aggression comes out, but that was very controllable for me. It was never, I'm someone who could run a gram of tren and fucking feel great every single day. Like, swear to God, like I felt fucking awesome. Most people can't do that. Most people don't feel that way. But there's definitely a difference. Excuse me. Sorry about that. The thing is that if I'm running gear, and especially like when I was competing and running a lot more gear, I did feel more aggressive, but in a very controllable way. And actually for me, it was just in a very positive way. It aided me in competition. It aided me in training, but didn't inhibit my personal life at all. I never had any incidents where I like freaked out and lost my shit because I was on something. It just doesn't happen for me. Was I a little quicker to things? Maybe sometimes, yes, but it was the same circumstances that led to that. But it was never a problem for me. And like I've heard one of my good friends recently just did an interview a couple of days ago where he talked about like how dark he feels and where his mind goes when he's on a bunch of gear and how he hates life. I never felt that way at all. Like I was like, fucking life is great. Like I just felt like everything was turned up in a good way. But like I said, it's going to emphasize what's already there. Now, when I got rid of all the androgens and just had estrogen and progesterone in my body, in some ways I felt good. Like it was a very calming, peaceful effect. Like I just felt more calm and more peaceful, which was good. But when it came to competition, that wasn't so good. And I found that I definitely felt less confident initially. Like it took me some time to work through that. And I seemed to get nervous easier. Before I used to turn nervous energy into aggression. I wasn't able to do that anymore. And, or at least not as easily. And I think I found more balance. Like,
was that frustrating?
Yeah, it was. And then, and it was one of those things that like 2 years ago, I went completely off. So like, so I started running gear at 32 and then pretty much ran gear. It didn't take long before my off cycles didn't exist anymore. Yeah. And I was competing at the highest levels and, my goals were to be number one. So, I basically like my being off was just running test. And what I would do is I'd run anywhere, typically like be 100% honest. I'm not going to bullshit anybody here and downplay what I did. I ran typically 500 to a gram of test in the off season year round. And then, it would taper depending on how I felt, but I was able to make really good progress on that. My health my health numbers looked good and it worked for me. And like I said, I tended to require higher dosages than a lot of people, but I also tended to tolerate them better. And which another thing with my genetics, I was just fortunate that way. And then I would only add other things in when it was coming up for contest prep, which I usually started at 16 weeks out. And I had my big three: test, tren, anadrol. Those were fucking no-brainers for me. I tolerated them better than most people. Like I would run like people, some people, it's funny because when you talk about this stuff, some people are going to be like, oh, that's bullshit. You had to run more than that. And then other people are going to be like, holy fuck, I can't believe you did that. It's crazy. But my standard cycle before, like I won the Arnold, before I broke the world record, when I was at the peak of my career, was I'd start out with a gram of test and then I would add in 700 milligrams of tren a week and 100 milligrams of anadrol a day. And then sometimes towards the end, I might bump my test to 1500. I tried bumping it to 2 grams a couple times, but I never felt any additional gains. And I definitely had like more bloating and stuff I didn't want. So typically I was somewhere between a gram and 1500 milligrams of test, 700 milligrams of tren a week and 100 milligrams of anadrol a day. And I never went over those. When I was bodybuilding, I did do slightly more tren, but less of the other stuff. But that was my pre-contest cycle. And I would do that for like 16 weeks. And sometimes I wouldn't add the tren in maybe till 12 weeks out and anadrol, but like, and people are like, oh, you can't run anadrol for more than 7 days or whatever. You know what? My liver enzymes were fine. I watched everything. I felt great. And nothing for me, anadrol was the drug that made me bigger and stronger than anything. It worked really well for me. But the funny thing was D-ball didn't do shit for me. D-ball would tank my HDL worse than anything.
Are you looking to boost recovery, enhance your sex drive, and improve performance in the gym? Do you think your hormones are out of whack and you're tired of getting the runaround from your doctor? Things like your hormones are just fine, stop lifting heavy weights, etc., etc., etc. I know what that feels like as I've been down that road most of my life. This is why we've partnered with Merrick Health. Merrick Health is a premium telehealth platform that specializes in hormone optimization and preventative medicine, ensuring a better quality of life. Merrick Health offers a table talk panel tailored for our listeners, featuring comprehensive tests like total and free testosterone, sensitive estradiol, and advanced markers like lipoprotein A and IGF-1. These comprehensive panels of up to 84 carefully selected biomarkers allow you to identify areas of enhancement and maximize your physical, cognitive, and sexual performance. It's much different than the panels you may get from your doctor. Choose between self-service options where you can select lab panels based upon decades of experience, or opt for guided optimization with your own health coach. Start with a detailed breakdown of your labs and receive personalized treatment options, both over the counter and prescription. Visit merrickhealth.com/tabletalk and use the code TABLETALK to get 10% off your first order. Merrick Health isn't just about better health, it's about empowering you to take control of your well-being. Summer's here and so is the heat. I've spent most of my life training in unconditioned gyms, and I know most of you that are training in garage gyms, private gyms, black iron gyms, know what I'm talking about when I say the heat sucks. It kills your motivation to go to the gym. It kills your performance, but it doesn't have to if you keep your electrolytes up. That's why today's episode is sponsored by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. This means lots of salt with none of the junk. No sugar, no colors, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. It contains an electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, brain fog, sleeplessness, and other common symptoms associated with electrolyte deficiency. Right now, Element is offering a free sample pack with any drink mix purchase. Get yours at drinkelement.com. This deal is only available through the Table Talk link. Are you tired of sleeping hotter than hell? This was something that I used to complain about all the time. And a few years ago, when I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, he referred me to the Chili Pad from Sleep Me. And let me tell you, it was a game changer. This is why I'm thrilled to announce today's sponsor of the podcast is Sleep Me. The Sleep Me Chili Bed cooling system lets you customize your sleeping environment to your own optimal temperature, ensuring you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. As you've heard on the podcast, if not every podcast, performance isn't just about how hard we train, it's how you recover, and sleep is vital. The Chili Pad creates a cool surface, ensuring temperature no longer disrupts your sleep. It's a water-based mattress topper that works with your existing mattress and lets you control the sleep temperature from 55 to 115 degrees. Imagine falling asleep quickly, staying asleep, and waking up fully refreshed. This isn't just about escaping the heat. It's about enhancing your recovery, boosting your energy, and sharpening your mental edge. Whether it's just you or you and a partner, Chili Pad can be customized to suit each person's temperature preference. Visit www.sleep.me/tabletalk to get your Chili Pad and save up to $315 with the code TABLETALK. This offer is available exclusively for Table Talk listeners and only for a limited time. Order today with free shipping and try it out for 30 days.
Other drug. And I didn't get, it would bloat me worse than anything else. And I barely got any gains from it. I tried it like 3 different times for 8 to 12 week cycles. And same thing happened every time. I was like, that's just not a good drug for me. And I would never, DECA never helped my joints. And then the interesting thing then, so after my competition era was done, over the last, probably almost 10 years now, it was very interesting. So what I did was I tried one thing at a time and at very low dosages, like replacement level dosages, but with different things. And so what I was trying to do is I was trying to, maintain as much performance as I can while minimizing the stress on my body and hopefully inhibiting the feminization as little as possible. But what I found, unfortunately, is even a small amount of androgens would completely shut down the feminization. But what I would, I'd take Primo, 100 to 200 milligrams a week or sometimes even less. And I would experiment okay, now if I taper the dose back, where do my gains start to fall off at? At what point boom, now I'm noticing that I'd lost strength this week. And then, so that's the limit with that one. And how high would, if I raise it a little bit, am I getting more, more benefit and still no downside? At what point do the downside start? And then just rotating different drugs, it was surprising to see, wow, this drug was much more potent milligram for milligram than this one was. And then this one barely did shit. And this one didn't do anything but tank my numbers. And I was surprised by one of the things I did that I never did when I was competing. I tried SARMs and I tried Ostarine. The fucking shit tanked my numbers worse. I might as well have been on a full contest cycle. My blood, my numbers, my hematocrit, hemoglobin all elevated. Liver enzymes went up way more than normal. My cholesterol was affected more than any cycle I've ever run in my life. And this was from a moderate dose of Ostarine. And the gains were shit. Was it better than being completely off? Yeah. But it was not even close to the weakest steroid. But yeah, I couldn't believe how bad it affected my health numbers. And, so that was the only way to know, trying one thing at a time, getting my blood work done and seeing what things look like and monitoring my training. And so I learned a lot about like just like individual things. But then again, there's a lot of stuff that individual genetics and individual people, like, you know, certain people respond really well to certain drugs, can't tolerate other ones. There's a lot of people can't tolerate tren. A lot of people don't tolerate Anadrol well. Like I said, for me, I required more of the heavy hitters, but I also tolerated them better than most. So, you know, just genetics is figuring that stuff out. And I just think like my advice to new people is, number one, make sure the risk is or the reward is worth the risk. Like it just don't just jump on it because everybody else does, especially with women. Like there's going to be some serious effects. Like going back to what I said earlier about there's no free lunch. No androgen, they're all male hormones. They're all a variation of male hormones. No, there's no drug a woman can take that isn't going to have some type of masculizing effect. Now, even if you scale back the dosage, it might take longer and it might be mild. And again, some girls are going to tolerate things better than others, but they're all male hormones and it doesn't take much for those masculizing effects to start happening. And some of them, yeah, once your vocal cords thicken, that's not going back. Once these bone, you know, your face shape and stuff changes, it's not going back. You start getting facial hair and, you know, balding and stuff, like past a certain point, that's not going away. And some people, if you're okay with that, if you understand that and you're okay with it, that's one thing. But if it's another, like if you think you're going to, well, I'm just going to do this for one more contest. I'm just going to do this. Well, and the thing I hate to see is coaches and boyfriends or husbands pushing girls to do a lot of stuff because that's what they do. And they think like, I see so many coaches and significant others pushing like testosterone and stuff. Like, listen, girls, that is straight male hormone. Is it going to help your performance? Absolutely. Is it going to come without issues? Fuck no. And even doing like, you know, they're doing these little tiny dosages. And the thing is, stuff happens slowly. Like they think they're not having any issues, but you don't see it because it happens little by little by little. Then one day they look in the mirror and like, fuck, I don't look like I used to. I don't sound like I used to. And if that's something that you're okay with and you accept, hey, more power to you. But if that's something you don't want, you absolutely don't want, then draw that line and say, hey, this is where I pull the plug on things. This is where it's no longer worth it for me. And you need to stick by that. And don't ever let other people push you into stuff because I see that way too much. And that's like when I get girls that are, you know, pretty good athletes and, you know, they want to do their first bodybuilding show or, you know, even bikini stuff where they, you know, everybody takes VAR. I want to take VAR. Are you sure? Like, is this, and listen, there's going to be consequences. And some girls maybe they're going to be able to get away with a little better than others and it's going longer, but sooner or later that's going to happen. And the higher the dose, the longer the duration, the more those effects are going to be. And it just, you know, and like I said, the thing I hate to see is, you know, girls that get a few years down the road and like, fuck, what did I do? This was not worth it. And they're in a place where they're really, really unhappy. And, you know, and for guys too, with health consequences and stuff, but obviously the masculinization effects aren't as big a deal. I mean, guys, the worst thing you got to worry about is acne and hair loss. Yeah. And most people don't give a shit. But yeah, I just, with the women, I just really hate to see people push into stuff without understanding what they're getting into or being lied to and told, oh, you can do this and it won't, as long as the dose is low enough, it's not going to cause anything. Okay. It might take longer, but you don't know. Like I've seen girls on a tiny bit of VAR and their voice drops like that, you know, like, and some of them don't mind. They're like, well, I kind of like having a deeper voice. But if that's something that really bothers you, or I knew a girl who, she was a musician and she sang but she was a really good athlete too. And she was tempted on and off, like her friends all started taking stuff and they were CrossFit athletes and she saw the progress. One of them started doing bodybuilding and she was really tempted. And I'm like, okay, if you know, and she consulted me about it. And I was like, well, look, are you sure this is what you want? And what is it worth to you? You know, how satisfying do you think this is going to be? How important is it? And is it worth giving up your career as a musician? You know, like she's not a professional, but plays local clubs and stuff like that and really, really enjoys it and has a really nice voice. I'm like, it's highly likely it's going to change your voice no matter what. And it may totally ruin it as far as singing goes. Is that worth it to you? And she's like, well, no, absolutely not. Then I'm like, this is a path you don't want to go down then, you know? And, it just, yeah, like I said, I don't like seeing people lied to or having those things downplayed and not understanding what they're risking when they go into it. You know?
With you personally, when your testosterone is tanked, does that impact your confidence?
I think it maybe did initially. And, you know, confidence is based on so many things, right? Like your level of proficiency, your preparedness, you know, previous success and all those. But I definitely noticed that year that I was competing in jiu-jitsu, completely off everything and only on estrogen and progesterone. And the other thing too, I had scaled back my training lifting wise, trying to shrink my body more and lose some especially my upper body mass, trying to conform to more ideal societal feminine standards, which is a whole nother topic. But my performance suffered a lot. And I felt more nervous going into competition. I felt less confidence. And part of that was probably I realized like I wasn't, it did affect my performance. My technique and knowledge wasn't good enough yet to compensate for that. And I didn't do I did really good like the first 6 months controlling my diet and stuff. But then after that, like I found myself using food for comfort more than I ever had before. And I put on more fat than I was comfortable with. And granted, by most people's standards, I was still fairly lean, but I was fatter than I was comfortable with. And that affected things too. So I didn't lose as much weight as I was hoping. And I was basically, lost muscle, gained fat, performance went down, and it just kind of was a big snowball effect and wasn't good for me. And then so after a full year, I was like, I'm getting my ass kicked on the mat. I don't look the way I want to look. There hasn't been enough of the positive effect to justify the negative effect. And then I, started adding things in, like doing a little bit of fire and then, primo. And I found for me, primo seemed to be the one that was the most mild and gave me what I wanted with the least amount of downside. But then I realized too, it still blocked the feminization that I wanted. So again, I'm back, I've been completely off again now for a while, but this time it's going much, much better. I've been more diligent with my eating and cardio and training, and my performance has still dropped off noticeably, but not to the same degree it did before. Plus I've been training for 2 years longer. I'm more proficient and, my technique's better. I'm working more on mobility and flexibility and things like that. And really, emphasizing my cardio and trying to use, cardio as a weapon too, to where, I can maintain a higher pace than my opponents. And, but then also some of it's just, like we mentioned earlier, an identity thing, like not just viewing myself like as the only thing of value I have as an athlete. And, and just being like, none of us are getting younger. Is this what I want for the rest of my life? For me, the big question was, am I going to live the rest of my life and never see this transition all the way through? Is that really what I want to do? Is it, or is this something that, here's the thing for me, like it's hard because like I said, I emphasize one, I take away from the other, but I do know every surgery I've had. So for people that aren't familiar with me, I've had 2 facial surgeries, 1 hair transplant a long time ago, which now that ship is long sailed, so it didn't matter. Had, the orchiectomy, been on female hormones on and off since 2015 and on constantly since 2021. Laser hair removal over my full body. What else have I done? But a lot of stuff did all try to feel more comfortable in my own skin. And here's the thing, every single thing I have done has felt amazing. There hasn't been one thing, like before my first facial surgery, I was pretty anxious that fuck, am I going to look like just like this weirdo? What if it doesn't come out excuse me. Sorry. What if it doesn't come out the way I want it to? What if and at that point, I wasn't I was out to you and people who are close circles and my friends and family, but I wasn't 100% out. And I'm like, what if I look so impossibly feminine that I'm going to look like I got a girl head stuck on a boy body and, all this stuff. But when I realized afterwards, I was like, wow, I really like all the changes and I want more. And so every single procedure I've done, every single thing I've done has felt amazing. And the facial surgeries were honestly the most, satisfying and the most validating things I've ever done and made me feel so much better. And now especially now as I'm when I'm completely off and my, features have softened even more, you get more subcutaneous fat, skin texture changes. Right now, when I do get dolled up and put on makeup and everything, I'm so much happier with the image I see in the mirror. It's night and day. I can't, and then I had told you before we were on the air, after I had ruptured my quadriceps tendon back in January and had surgery, I couldn't train jiu-jitsu and I couldn't do cardio initially. And all I was doing was lifting. So I kind of fell back into, well, fuck, if I can only lift, let's hit this fucking hard. And it was fun for a minute. It was kind of great to get in that old mentality, go in there trying to kill it every day. And my strength exploded. I threw a little bit of gear back in, put over in that old muscle memory and having competed at a high level for a long time, all came roaring back. I put over 100 pounds on my bench in 4 to 6 weeks. I put on 20, 30 pounds of muscle like overnight. Like people were looking at me like, what the fuck is going on? And it was fun. But then I also realized, I shot back up to 250 and I realized this isn't what I want anymore. This isn't the most important thing to me anymore. And then I didn't even want to get dialed up at all because when I looked in the mirror, I did not like what I saw. Like it did not make me feel good. And so I think, and let's hope, fingers crossed, but I feel like I finally made peace with that and kind of laid that part of it to rest, that I know that's not where I want to be anymore. And going forward in this direction. Now, do I still want to be a good athlete? Do I still want to go out and, kick ass in jiu-jitsu? Absolutely. But I've also got to accept that if I want to do these other things that make me feel really good and are very important to me, there is a cost there, and I've got to make peace with that. And I feel like I have, but that's easy to say when things are going well. It's when things get rough, and then do I still feel peace with it? And I think so. I think I'm finally at a point in my life where either I'm secure enough in who I am, or my priorities have shifted enough, or whatever it is, but I feel really good about the path I'm on. It doesn't mean I'm going to stop being an athlete. I'll never stop being an athlete. I'll never stop training because that's a big part of who I am and what I really enjoy. But I think my priorities have shifted, and what I want out of the rest of my life is different than what I've, done this first half of my life.
What would you say are the biggest misconceptions people have as you as a person?
I think that unfortunately with the whole trans thing, unfortunately it's got tied up with politics, right?
It's weaponized, politicized, and everything else.
100%. So there's narratives been pushed that trans people are all, mentally ill and we're a bunch of crazies and we don't need surgeries. We need therapy, as if, someone can just send you to a therapist and this goes away. It doesn't work that way. The reality is that, most of us, and I can't speak for anyone else.
I'm just saying, I specifically asked about you. So
I think the misconception is that I would say the single biggest thing is that the person I was before people knew that I was trans, that the Marine, the champion powerlifter, the aggressive, crazy person, that was all some kind of act, that wasn't me, that was this fake person that I was hiding behind. And some people do those things, and definitely I overcompensated in certain ways. I was very, I was overly hypersensitive about not doing anything the least bit feminine and stuff like that because it made me feel exposed. I thought people would know what I was hiding. But no, those are all real parts of me. I'm still, I'm still the Marine. I'm still the athlete. I'm still the competitor. I still want to win as bad as anybody around. That has nothing to do with my identity, male, female, whatever. That's just all part of my genetic wiring and who I am. And I have aspects to my personality that society would define as masculine. And I would argue that those are very nebulous things and the definitions are always changing. But my core identity has always been female. It's something I've always struggled with. This isn't something new. And it's you hear people say, oh, well, I remember when I first came out, people accused me of doing this for attention and as a business move. Somehow, if that was the worst business move of all time. Because what happened? I lost almost all my sponsorships. I mean, you guys are one of the few that still stood behind me. But most of the companies immediately dropped me. I actually got fired from my main job. Financially, it, I won't say it ruined me, but it made things very difficult for a long time. And then we talked about you, the reason you wanted to have me back on again is that all my accomplishments and the respect and people, being able to learn from the things I've done, that all went out the window. All of a sudden, well, no, Kroc's just some weirdo. Mm-hmm. And all people want to talk about, all people want to focus on is me being trans and, oh yeah, the steroids caused that. And, this and that, that's what happens when you run tons of gear. And no, this is something I knew by 4 or 5 years old, struggled with on a daily basis, buried down and fought as hard as I could, as long as I could, my entire life. Dealt with lots of guilt, shame, and, self-esteem issues because I didn't want to be this way. There was nothing in me no one in the world that wanted this less than I did, but you can't fight who you are, and then finally I just, got secure enough in who I am and realized it drove me to the brink of suicide. I was strongly considering ending my life at one point because I just didn't see any way I could be, I could have a successful life. I'm I'm going to be alone forever. I'm never going to be able to exist in society as a woman. And now that I'm doing these things, it's looking back, I never thought I'd get to the place I'm at now. And I'm hoping the future is going to be even better. And I expect that it will be. But a lot of it is, getting, more mature and more secure in who you are and caring less and less about what people think. but it's not easy. I'm not going to, even now, like going out in public and stuff. And even though like I look much more feminine than I ever have, and, you know, and obviously I've learned better how to dress myself and how to do makeup and hair and things like that. Those all help. But yeah, I'm still quite large. I still draw attention, and yeah, sometimes they're very disapproving looks, you know, comments, and you still hear things all the time. And it's not easy to block that out 100% of the time. But yeah, I think the biggest misconception is that like the person, like the people that knew as the lifter and the Marine, all that was some kind of fake thing. It wasn't. That's always been me. It's a part of me. And there was just, the biggest thing with me was, there was a whole bunch more of me that no one knew about or no one understood. And as crazy as it sounds, my core identity is female and always has been. And everything I've done to move in a more feminine direction has made me feel amazing and has helped a ton. And, you know, and that's, you know, for me, that's the only way to find peace with all of this and, you know, make my life even better. And it's still a journey, still a process, still balancing. And like right now I'm in a really good place with everything. Is that saying I'm never going to have struggles again? Is that say there's never going to be a temptation to maybe throw a little bit of gear back in as an athlete? I can't promise you that, you know, like the athlete part of me still, you know, still wants to be a winner. So,
well, the athlete part of you is still part of you.
100%.
Right. So 100%. You can't nobody can entirely change themselves.
No. Mm-mm.
Right. So it's figuring out how to balance those two.
Exactly.
Well, you wanted to speak about your son.
Yeah, this is a tough topic, and hopefully I can get through some of this without, you know, getting too upset. But I think it's important to talk about because grief is something I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about, and it's a very uncomfortable topic, right? Like you don't just walk up to somebody who's been through a tragedy and start asking 50 questions. And so like, I know before I read anything happen to me, like I was extremely uncomfortable around people who'd just been through a tragedy and had no idea how to interact with them or even like, you know, what to say, you know, and it's a tough thing. I think the things that like I didn't understand or things that have surprised me, or maybe I just never thought about because I've never been through anything, was that, you know, sometimes like being supportive and stuff just means like being present for somebody and just, you know, you don't need to hear a lot. Like there's nothing anybody can say, right, that's going to make everything better. It's just, you know, for someone like me to lose a child is just the worst thing in the world. Like nothing even close compares, and nothing's going to change that. But just having friends that were there for me and supportive and, you know, just came over and hung out sometimes in the days afterwards, that helped a lot. I'm just saying, you know, you don't have to say anything like super deep, super meaningful or anything like that, but just being like, you know, I'm sorry, is there anything I could do? You know, that's sometimes just letting them know that, you know, you care and you know, you feel for them, that helps. And people are going to be different. Everybody's different. Some people want to talk about it. Some people don't. I'm somebody who's probably more open and willing to talk about things. And it's not something easy to talk about, but times it helped. And there's just a lot to like, you know, like it's been almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years on August 1st. And I hate to say it, but it doesn't feel any easier than it did, you know, 2 years ago. It was a shock, and, you know, and life will never be the same. But you know, you go forward, you do the best you can. And it's something that it's, you know, I don't know if it's the only thing in life, but it's one of the only things that it doesn't get better. You learn how to live with it and I'm able to find enjoyment in all the things I've always found enjoyment in, which is good. You know, I still have my other 2 sons, which are amazing.
How long did that take?
It's, you know, I don't know if there is a length or you can measure that, or like, you know, I wouldn't say I'm in a place where it doesn't bother me, but you know me, I'm someone who rebounds unnaturally fast from almost everything. And I was back, I think, dude, I didn't take long. Like at least as far as like, you know, some people, you know, disappear for several months or however long it is, or just, you know, go away from everything for quite a while. I think I didn't go to jiu-jitsu practice for like a week, you know, maybe a week and a half.
So you understood that some semblance of normality was going to help.
Yeah. For me, getting back in my routine and what am I going to do? None of that's going to change anything. It's not going to bring them back. And, so I went back to practice a week later, and it was, some tough conversations initially. And, we went to, for people who aren't familiar with Jiu-Jitsu, ADCC is one of the biggest competitions. It's kind of like the Olympics of grappling is what it's considered. I'd already bought tickets to the ADCC championships for that year. And it was 2 weeks after my son died. And then I was like, fuck, I still go. This was something I really, really wanted to go to and look forward to. And I did. And it was a good thing I went. But what no one knew was that I would disappear to go to the bathroom frequently. I wasn't going to the bathroom. I was going to there crying my fucking eyes out. And, but so that's it's one of those things, when you go through it, at least for me, you do want to talk about it, or you need to some degree, but at the same time, it's a heavy topic, right? And I didn't want to burden everyone around me. And like I said, it wasn't going to make everything change, but I did need to talk about my closest friends. I shared stuff. My good friend Olivia came out and stayed with me for a week, and that helped a ton. But yeah, I still went to ADCC, still enjoyed watching all the matches, but I had to duck out a lot and, take minutes and disappear for a little bit. I didn't say anything because, I didn't want to burden everyone around me constantly with, what I'm dealing with. But yeah, you just kind of learn to move forward. Everybody's, different. And you hear things about grief comes in waves, and, some of them are bigger and stronger and crash harder. And it's kind of unpredictable. For me, it's been more of a constant weight. It feels like a weight I carry and I'm always going to carry, just you get better at carrying that weight. Mm-hmm. And I didn't go through, there's books written and things about the stages of grief and everything. It didn't work that way for me. I never had an anger stage. I've never been angry about it. For me, it was just intense, overwhelming sadness. And that's still kind of been where it's at. And right now, I noticed this last year, like I said, I seriously think about him every single fucking day. And I probably always will. I look at pictures, I watch videos. That actually helps. But it's never out of my mind. But there are times when it's more intense. There's times when it's less intense. And this time of year, his birthday was in May, and the anniversary of his death is August 1st. And I noticed last year, between those two times, was especially rough. And I feel like it's been that way again this year. I don't know if it's just, the reminder of those events. Because like I said, I still think about him every day, no matter what. And I definitely don't break down nearly as much as I used to. And I can talk about it more. But it's still difficult. I'm sure it always will be. I mean, in my son, for me, there's nothing worse in life that could happen. And, and sometimes there's this tendency to think that, why me? Fuck, I've had to deal with being trans. I had cancer. Been through a lot of shit, but that's not how, not everybody gets dealt the same deck. Not everybody has the same opportunities, and life is what you make it. So, you deal with the hard shit and you learn from it. You become stronger. I don't know, with his death, how much of a learning experience it is, other than, re-emphasizing how valuable life is and how you never know how much longer you have. I think, I won't say that spurred on my transition anymore, but it does make me realize, or reminds me that I'm someone who's always been very conscious of mortality. But it does remind me that our time is limited and we only have so many days, and you never know when that's coming. None of us had any idea that was going to happen. It was 22. But yeah, so I mean, if there's any lesson, it's just that nothing's promised. We don't know how long we're going to be here. Don't put anything off, do the things you really want to do them now. I'm going to pivot here. Sure.
So has having your own gym been what you thought?
Yes and no. Some of it, yes. Some of it, no. It's just like, I guess you think like for me, because I'd always had like this garage gym. We always had like this little club, and I envisioned it.
Your basement gym was the best.
Oh, dude. Yeah.
Blood red paint. All that.
Descending into hell. That was, that's, but yeah, lots of great stories and times down there. And even when it was in the garage too, and just having a great group of guys. So I guess for me, opening a gym, I envisioned it just being a larger version of that, right? Like it was going to be that same kind of culture, same kind of people. It was going to be all people that were very similar to me and their goals and aspirations, or at least desired that type of atmosphere. And then what you realize is, you know what, there's not a whole lot of people like us. And those aren't the people that are going to, pay the bills. And that's totally fine, but it was a bit of a surprise. And then, so I guess maybe the fact that I had a little less control over the culture than I thought I would. And don't get me wrong, we've got a really good culture at my gym. I like my members, and it's been a great thing. And like, I'm very, very happy that I did it. I have zero regrets. But yeah, it grows. It's like it's an animal of its own, right? Like it's going to grow in certain directions that you can't control to some degree. And you have to kind of go along with it. And then also like for me, I'm the type of person, I'm not in it, for the money. Like I want my gym to be able to support the things I want to do in life. And I'm not somebody who has like extravagant desires as far as like material things. There's a couple things, like I do like cars and stuff. Like cars are a thing of mine, but as long as it can keep the lights on, pay the bills, that's enough for me and allow me to do the things in life, like travel a little bit, compete and continue to do those things. But like my time there, I can spend 16 hours in the gym, and I don't mind it one bit, like, don't get me wrong. There's certain things that frustrate me, and, you'll have a little bit of drama, you'll have other things, and dealing with landlords and business stuff and getting bent over by the city and the state with taxes. I've had issues with that and IRS stuff. And it's like, come on, guys, small business people, they put it to you. But like I'll tell people, my worst day in the gym is better than my best day in pharmacy, and not that I hated being a pharmacist, and it's a good career, don't get me wrong. But I'm someone who definitely operates and feels a lot better when I have autonomy and I can do my own thing versus someone like some people fit very good as a cog in a system. I'm not one of those people. I get super frustrated with bureaucracy and BS rules and politics and office ass kissing. Like I hate all that stuff. I just want to do my job. Tell me what to do. Let me do it and stay out of my way. And I'll do really well. But like, so the corporate world was always really hard for me. And even in just something like a hospital with just, the rules and the politics and the BS, like I really struggled with that. And so this is just a much better environment for me. I'm around something I love all the time, even if there's days where, there are headaches and stuff like that. But, it's been a positive thing for sure. Yeah. Like financially, there's, more concerns, you have some good months, you have some bad months, and there's been a couple months where I was like, if I don't pull this shit out, like I'm going to start thinking like, I got to make some changes here or things are going to get to a not good place. So there's a little bit more anxiety sometimes about that. And I think, sometimes like there's this assumption, I think people think that because of the documentary and because of my career as a powerlifter or something that I had all this money in the bank or that I'm wealthier than you look bullshit up online. There's websites that say I have worth $5 million. Where the hell that came from, I have no idea, but I sure as my bank account doesn't know that, but yeah, so, financially, yeah, it's a bit where, full well how owning a business is. So there's a little more uncertainty. There's a little more risk, but you know what I said when I did this, I'm like, hey, I'm going to put everything in here and give it 100%. And what's the worst thing that can happen? I go bankrupt, I go broke. So what? I've been there before. No big deal. It's only money.
What have been unexpected positives from it?
Unexpected positive, I'd say like the community and the friends I've made through the gym. Like, I've got a ton of good friends now that I've met through owning the gym people I never knew before. And just like the lower stress levels. I'm not gonna say there isn't stress because there fucking is. And some days it's a lot, but as a whole, there's a lot less stress than when I was going to the hospital every day and, way overworked, understaffed, and making a lot of stressful decisions under, very tough time constraints. So like for me, it's more of a much overall positive feeling. Like I said, I can go in and be there. And the funny thing is, it's like in the gym, if members don't see you, they assume you're never there. Like, and there's like, and my jiu-jitsu practice times often correlate with the times when the gym's the busiest, like in the evenings. And so there's like, I know there's a handful of members that think I'm hardly ever there and stuff. And then they'll see me at odd times and be like, oh, I'm surprised you're here. Motherfuckers, I'm here 7 days a week without fail, unless I'm traveling for a competition or speaking or something like that. And I'm often there like 8 to 16 hours a day. They don't realize like I'll be there all day, leave for 3 hours for jiu-jitsu practice, come back after everybody else is gone. And I'll be there. Like the members who come in late at night, see me at midnight, 1 a.m. I'm still in my office working on shit. Like it's just, and it's funny because they think if like the 4 times or 3 times a week that they're there and they don't see me, oh, Janae's never here, and I've heard people say like that. I'm like, motherfuckers, like you have no idea how many hours I put in or all that, running, it's still a business, it's a gym, but still all kinds of stuff that has to happen. Like people don't even think about, just maintaining the place and dealing with the landlord and paying bills and inventory and equipment maintenance and, constantly looking at ways to grow the business and, working with people like, I spent tons of times and wasted tons of money, like trying different promotions that don't work and, stuff like that. And, all these meetings you have that nobody else knows about. And, but like I said, I don't regret a minute of it. And so, 3 years in, lights are still on, place is still going, and I have aspirations of hopefully growing in the future. We'll see when the lease is up at this place. And but yeah, so far so good. And it's like anything else, you get out of it what you put into it. And I've been really fortunate to have some members that are very helpful and support me a lot and have done a lot for me. And are, some of them are very quick to volunteer and help out, and some of them aren't, and that's totally okay. But yeah, and like running the competition, like we run at least 2 competitions a year, and next one's coming up in November. It's a ladies only meet, and the people like the gym members and stuff and friends that pitch in and help with that, it's really cool. It's really, and I probably don't thank those people enough, but it's really cool to see everybody pitch in and help and make it like a team effort. And so that, yeah, definitely some really cool things that have come about because of it.
Were there any topics you wanted to go over I didn't bring up?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. I mean, like with the trans stuff, the only thing, like if people are watching video of this or whatever, and they're like, well, what the fuck? I don't see any hair. I don't see any makeup. You don't look like very, very feminine right now. I just, like that. No, I haven't detransitioned. I didn't give up on all that. This is just what I look like when I don't have a wig on or, I'm not wearing makeup. And this, for the way my life is, unfortunately, the things for me, the things that I really enjoy and I'm really involved in aren't very conducive to wearing wigs and, makeup and dressing up in a very, extremely feminine manner every day. So yeah, it's like, I don't, especially it's hot in the summertime, I'm not wearing wigs every day, and but I do a lot, and it makes for some funny stories. Cause a lot of times if people aren't familiar with me and they come in the gym, they'll see me looking like this and then see me all dolled up. And then I'll get somebody to walk up to me and be like, oh, is your husband here today? Or, and then I always take that as a compliment. Then I'm like, oh, thank you. Yeah. And, yeah, so, it is quite, I even saw a comment. There was, what was it on? I might have did I think it was a video I did with Mike Israetel, and excuse me. And in the comment section under one of the videos, it said, oh yeah, her husband was a legend. And, had no idea that it was the same person. And, but yeah, it's funny, but it's just like, going to jiu-jitsu every day, wigs and makeup don't wear well there. But the cool thing is like my school is super supportive. I go to Assembly Jiu-Jitsu in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. And my head coach is David Garmo, and they've been fucking awesome to me. I mean, I've been open since day one there. I was very much like, a couple of the members knew who I was when I joined, and I had some friends training there already, but the head coach and owners and everybody have been fucking awesome. Support me 100%. I walk into practice some days and, all dolled up and go in locker room, change, whatever. And my wig head freaks people out sometimes, but everybody's super cool. Nobody cares. And like, everybody's been really supportive. And,
have you found that to be the case in person, kind of across the board, that most people just don't give a shit?
Yeah, I would say more than you would think. I mean, I'm sure there's some haters. I know there's people who talk shit behind my back.
Well, it's behind your back. That's a whole different. It's online, whatever.
Yeah. And there's tons of that. And there's, I mean, obviously there's been people who said horrible fucking things like, I should be executed and, whatever. And that, I'm some disgusting pervert or whatever. But I couldn't care less about all that stuff. But to my face, I've never, in public I've gotten plenty of nasty looks. I've had, snide comments made walking by. I've had some people scream stuff at me. Like whatever, dude. Like those are your issues. They're not mine. Mm-hmm. I did, the worst I've had is I had 5 guys follow me into a garage one night and pretty certain that they were about to jump me. And then I think they got really close and maybe this isn't worth our time. Mm-hmm. Maybe this could be more of a hassle than what we want. But that made me very conscious of being a target, which I had never felt before. But yeah, and the place it happened was some place that's generally considered very safe. So that was a kind of an eye opener. I've had more than one person. I've had some stalkers, but I had one person who harassed me daily for 9 months straight. And the threats escalated to the point where they were threatening my life constantly. And it was weird because it was difficult to realize I was so powerless to do anything about it. Like I didn't know who this person was. It was all online, but I didn't know where they lived, what they even looked like. Initially they were trying to blackmail me into webcamming with them. It was like a sexual kink for them. And dude, you'd be shocked. Well, maybe you wouldn't be, but there's a whole lot of men out there that are very into trans girls. And there's a lot of people, it can be a very fetishy thing, but there's a very large culture of that. And so it's been interesting learning to deal with all those things that a lot of women have dealt with their entire lives. But yeah, I got to the point where I had the one guy who was threatening my life all the time. And the guy was clearly unhinged, not mentally well. And I was doing a lot of speaking at the time. And so it started becoming a thing where when I would get up to get speaking, I would be scanning the audience the whole time to see if there's anybody acting weird or, I never knew, dude could have walked in with a gun, been sitting in the audience and just wait. And fortunately, none of that's happened. But yeah, unfortunately it does. There's changes your life in different ways. And it's, been a learning process, but overall it's been great. But to people who are wondering, yeah, I'm still moving forward with the whole process. And I'm actually getting a consultation for bottom surgery, which is something I've wanted for a really long time. And I'm hoping to get it done before the end of the year, but it's one of those things too. There's, it's a very serious surgery. There's risks with it. And,
you're okay with those?
Yeah. Well, it's like, the odds of the adverse events is low, but it's not zero. My biggest concern, to be very open about everything. So for me, one of the areas I've struggled most in life is in the bedroom, like intimacy, because even though I've been in, numerous long-term relationships with women, and I'm not going to say they weren't good and it wasn't, we didn't have good intimacy because we did, but it's always been very, very challenging for me because that's the part where there's no part of me that identifies with being male in that way. And it's like just intimacy in and of itself is very difficult because I basically feel like I'm in the wrong body. Like my brain, that part of my brain is wired to think that I have breasts and a vagina, and like trying to operate with different parts is I have to, just to be able to function, I have to do like this mental visualization and picture myself as a female. And it's like, I don't know what it's like to be intimate with anyone and just be able to be in the moment and actually enjoy it. I have no idea what that's like. And I'm hoping once, I have bottom surgery, actually I know that will, change everything, but hopefully, my concern is that I'm going to, that it's a very low chance, but like that I would lose the ability to orgasm or feel pleasure that way. It's I think it's like 97 point something % of people that go through it are orgasmic fine. And a lot of people will say that sex is way better for them than it was beforehand, but there is that risk. The nerves can be damaged. You lose feeling, you lose sensation, or you just, because of everything being rearranged, you have a much more difficult time. And granted, in general, females have a harder time, achieving that than males anyway. But for me, that's a very important aspect of my life. And the idea of not being able to enjoy that is a very big thing to consider. And that and just risk of complications, and then again, having to take several months off training and because the recovery is,
oh my God.
But, and of course I'm sure I'll be back, faster than doctor recommends, but yeah, like it's a significant process and a lot goes into it. But something I've known, like if there was magic and I could have snapped my fingers, I would have done this 30 years ago, no questions asked. But obviously that possibility doesn't exist. It's not that easy. And there are real risks and things associated with it. And, and it's a one-shot deal, like once you go, and sometimes there are like, sometimes people need additional procedures, revisions to get everything as good as it can be. But yeah, there's a risk that I could get it done and maybe the stuff doesn't work. It's a very low percentage and very unlikely, but that's a dice I got to be willing to roll in order to get to where I want to be. And for me, this is something that regardless of how I look on the outside, that this is something I know 100% like would be a huge step in the right direction for me. And, I get very excited about just thinking about it, but yeah, so I got a consultation coming up. Hopefully I can get that done before the end of the year. There's often a lengthy waiting list and, but yeah, so, I'm continuing to move in that direction. That all feels good. Maybe there'll be a day where, I'm only presenting very feminine 24/7 all the time. And again, like, what's the definition? I wish that like I was feminine enough to the point that even with a shaved head, like I would only be perceived as female no matter how I looked or what I was doing or how I was dressed. Right now I'm not at that point. I am at a point where if I am presenting feminine, then I'm 100% read that way, which is very nice and very affirming. But yeah, if I don't have hair and makeup on, I walk into any store building, they're going to be like, that's a dude. And they might be like, why is that dude got painted nails carrying a purse and dressed weird? But, I don't care. I do my thing. I do what feels good. And at this point, like, yeah, life's way too short to, live it for what other people think. And,
What's the best way people can find you?
So yeah, I haven't been super active on social media the last couple of years between my son and like other things, but Janae Marie Kroc on Instagram, Kroc's Gym as our webpage for the gym. I can be reached through there. I do have someone else that manages the page for me, but they will forward everything to me if you reach out that way. I'm still on Facebook. I have a Twitter account, but I don't ever use it. But yeah, the easiest way is Instagram, the gym page. And I'm actually starting a podcast as well. It's called Authenticity, and myself and my good friend Olivia, we're doing it together, and that's all going to be about. We'll talk about lifting stuff, we'll talk about gender stuff, but it's obviously based on the title, it's all about being authentic and being real, because obviously in our society with social media and all those things, there's so much stuff that's fake, right? Like all these.
So how would you define authenticity?
Like
being real.
So basically like talking about like being in a lot of the conversations we're going to have, it's going to be being more open, being more authentic, like not like no bullshit. Like if I'm talking about, let's say, for example, I'm talking about, my steroid usage, I'm going to be 100% honest about everything I've done. If we're talking about, we are going to talk about grief. That's one of our planned episodes because unfortunately for her, she lost a little brother when she was very young and me with a son. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to be very open, very raw, and we're not going to hide anything. And then like other topics where like we're going to do our best. Everyone has a bias. We all have, through our own experiences, our own beliefs, we've got our own perspective, but we're going to do our best to be very objective and like present things, based on, facts and trying to be objective. Like I said, there's going to be some bias no matter what we do, but also try to look at both sides of things. Like if I believe in something, what are people who don't believe in that? Where are they coming from and why do they believe that way? So we're going to try to look at topics from multiple perspectives. And the cool thing is with her and I, even though we have a lot of similar beliefs, we also have very different beliefs. We come at it from very different perspectives. Like one of the episodes we're planning. So Olivia's been a female athlete her whole life, right? And then I'm someone who has kind of got thrust into that arena. And I don't know, like I don't have the same experiences she's had, right? Like we talked about, like for one, like when we were together, we used to date and now we're just really good friends. But when we were dating, I was asked to speak at a women's seminar and it was very difficult for her because here she was a pretty accomplished female athlete. Here's me brand new to the ball game. I'm getting asked to speak and getting these accolades and getting this recognition. And for her, it was very tough because it felt like why do you deserve this more than me? Like, I've been a woman my entire life. I've had to deal with all these things, and you're kind of late to the game. And yeah, not to say that I don't have struggles, and there's additional struggles being trans, and that not that I can't relate to a lot of the things she's experienced as well. And like, that's one of the things I found when I got to be a lot closer to the female strength athletes after coming out, because I knew a lot of them, but I wasn't like tight with them. And then after coming out, I did get close to a lot of the girls in the strength world, and it was really interesting and really cool for me, and very affirming for me to hear that they struggle with a lot of the same things I struggled with. But like Olivia, like, it was very tough for her to watch me do these things and feel like in a way that I didn't deserve it and I hadn't earned it. And I had never thought of that. Like, I saw it as us all being on the same team, you know, and I'm trying to support them and everybody else. And I focused on the things I could relate to. But so that's, one of the episodes we plan to talk about all those things. And like, for her, someone who's grown up in that world and has all these experiences that I don't have, like where it was coming out from her her perspective, and why she felt the way she did, and why in some ways she resented me for it. And so I think like stuff like that, like, even though like in the end we want the same things, we have very different experiences, and exploring topics, and like looking at things, like controversial things like trans athletes and people starting transition in their teens. And there's a lot of that's way overblown. Kids don't transition, we're doing surgery on a 6-year-old, but coming at it from multiple perspectives and looking at like, okay, here's what the data says. Here's what, like me, someone who grew up being trans and knowing all these trans people, this is our experiences, but also here are the people that are concerned about it and why they're concerned. And are these valid concerns or aren't they? And so trying really, really hard. Like I said, the overriding theme is authenticity and being authentic, but, not just saying like, oh, here's my perspective, this is right, and this is the only way. And so that's what it's all about. And we're really excited about it. I think it's going to be a really good thing. We're in the process of shooting the initial episodes now, and it should be up and running. We've got an Instagram page. It's not open yet, but it's the Authenticity Podcast is what it's called. And there's going to be a website under the same name, the Authenticity Podcast. And but I think it's going to be a really good thing. We're excited about it, and something we're putting a lot of effort into. When do you think it will be out? Hopefully within the next couple of months. We're learning that, like everybody who gets into it, it's not as easy as it seems. Yeah. And like just trying to figure out all the equipment, and we purchased, like all the equipment, then found out like, oh, these cameras aren't doing what we wanted, and then trying to coordinate the audio and, all the logistical end. And then also we shot an episode and then realized like, okay, we can do this better. And, so like we're still refining the process. But we should have episodes posted within the next month or two. And we already have like 30 plus episodes planned out. And that's before we even start having guests on. So there's a lot of topics that we think are important that we want to talk about. But yeah, by the end of summer, for sure, it should be up and running. Well, I want to thank you for coming out. I want to thank you for being a part of the company since 2005. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And with that, I guess we're done. Yeah. Well, thanks so much. I forgot. Any final thoughts? Yeah, no, just thanks so much for not only having me out again and having been part of the company for so long, but for always supporting me. You were one of the, few people that, even when I was going through some shit and a lot of people abandoned me, you were always there. And, I appreciate that. Well, I see you as you. I don't think that's that difficult for people. Yeah. for some it is, but the person's the person is how it is. But again, thank you. And guys, we're done. All right, guys, thanks for watching the video to the end. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and click here, or here for more videos.